the science and practice of enhancing human performance for sport, play, and life. Welcome to Perform. I'm Dr. Andy Galpin. I'm a professor and scientist and the executive director of the Human Performance Center at Parker University. Today's guest is Dr. Bret Contreras. Bret has a PhD in sports science, a master's degree in exercise science, and is a certified strength and conditioning coach. Bret is known popularly as the glute guy, and that's because he spent the last 30 years of his career focusing on the science and application of maximizing muscle growth and strength development in the lower body, and specifically the glute or butt muscles. We'll talk about that a lot today. You'll learn a tremendous amount about how to optimize training for the glutes, but we'll talk about much more than that. You're going to learn a lot about anatomy, physiology, biomechanics, and other things as they apply to practical recommendations. Bret does a phenomenal job and has over his career of weaving these things into conversations, not so that you learn unneeded or unnecessary mathematic principles, but so that you can really maximize your understanding of why certain exercises do certain things and others do not. This is going to allow you to leave this conversation, whether you're coaching people or just here for your own personal needs, having a much better understanding of how to choose the exact right exercise based upon what you're trying to get and what you're not trying to get. So Bret has spent a lot of career on people who are training that want specific development in a particular part of their lower body and not in others. You'll learn a lot about how to do that. You'll also learn about how to make sure that that exercise is doing the right thing for you personally that you're wanting it to do. So you're going to have a lot of fun. You'll take a lot away from this. I hope you can extend these learnings, again, from just females to men as well, from just the lower body to the upper body as well. And so overall, you can enhance the precision, accuracy, and effectiveness of your training and fitness routines, specifically regarding developing strength and muscle size in the lower body. That all said, please enjoy my conversation today with Dr. Bret Contreras. Dr. Bret Contreras, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
The world knows you for the most part as the glute guy, and we will certainly talk about the glutes today, but I know you as the guy who used to write extensive articles on the science of strength training, mechanics. I don't know how many of those things you wrote, and I read many years ago before social media existed, but it's very funny for me to hear people talk about you, and then my perception of you is like, this is the science guy. This is not the glute guy. This is the deep, passionate love for science guy. So I don't know where our conversation is going to go today, but I certainly know we will definitely talk about the glutes and how to train and why and all those things like that. But I'm personally a little bit more interested in kind of the other science stuff. So that is a little bit of my lead in. I don't know how you view all that stuff, but that's my perception of Dr. Bret Contreras.
Appreciate that.
To get us started, we're going to play the hits, right? We'll talk about the glutes and all that. But what I was really hoping to go into very first is you made a post fairly recently that I thought was really insightful. And actually, I've changed how I do stuff now permanently because of a single post that you made. And that was referring to the difference in how to train women versus men. Now, my answer, which I've changed my tune on typically is because I've trained a lot of female athletes, is there's not that many things that are different. But you actually gave some incredible insights into things that are different and how you do differently. And someone who's trained, I don't know, 80% of your clients over your career have been female? More? I don't know what's a fair number there.
Probably 90.
90+%. What are off the top of your head some of the major differences in coaching females? And I'll give you context for you. We're talking about strength training or strength training rated activities, not endurance running and like all things like that. So kind of within this wheelhouse, how do you think about this?
It's just mainly their goals. And so men can't seem to wrap their head around it. Like
it's funny you're saying this because this was literally me.
Yeah, it's most men. Because we want hypertrophy everywhere. If you were like, hey, Andy, you mind if I slap a little muscle on your traps? You'd be like, I'll take it.
I'd be
each
stoked.
delt head? Sure. Bis, tries? Sure. Pecs? Upper, lower? Yep. Lats?
You can't name a muscle right now that I'm not going to say yes to.
You'd say yes to everything. We want to grow everything. And so therefore, when we do our leg days with squats and deadlifts and lunges, and that tends to grow a lot of quad and adductor and glutes. But here's the deal. A lot of women, if they lean out, if they get lean, they like the way they look, They might want a little bit more quad and that, not too much, but they want a lot more glute. That's the goal, is to have large glutes. In fact, now surgeries are becoming very common because of that, because it's hard to get glutes through training. Through proper training, some don't get the glute mass they desire. So women want glutes, okay? Say a man wanted arms as bad as women want glutes. We said, look, we want you to get, I say I'm a man, I want the biggest arms possible. You wouldn't say that, like, you wouldn't go, Andy, quit doing isolation lifts. And just
free weights only. Do the
free
big
weights
complex
only,
movements.
and just
right.
do, you're going to get big triceps if you develop a strong bench
Right.
and weighted dips and close grip bench. And you know you're going to get big biceps if you do weighted chin-ups and pull downs, supinated pull downs. Right. Every guy knows that if I said I will give you $1 million if you put 2 inches on your arms in the next 6 months, what would every guy do? They'd start training it at least 3 days a week. You'd throw what you know out. You wouldn't go, train a muscle 1 day a week. You'd say, no, I'm going to train it
I don't
at
care
least.
what the study's saying.
You might even venture into training it every day. You might be like, I think I can do some curls every day. And you'd use variety. But you'd be going, I'm going to get as strong as possible at close grip bench and weighted dips. I'm going to get my weighted chin up, but that's going to make up, maybe a third of your volume. 2/3 are going to be curls and tricep extensions. But now use that exact same strategy for women with the glutes. Yes, they're going to do the squats. They're going to do their lunges. They're going to do their Romanian deadlifts, Bulgarian step-ups, etc. And they're going to try to get strong at those. But if that's all you did, you're leaving a lot on the table. Your maximum recoverable volume for glutes is probably 36 to 45 sets a week if you split it up properly. But here's the deal. Because if you said, Andy, you're only allowed to do like breathing squats, 1 set to feel where you're, you grind it out. You can do squats to failure, deadlifts to failure, and like walking barbell lunges to complete failure. How many sets could we squeeze in a week and recover from it still? Maybe 10 sets a week tops, where you're to failure.
Especially when you're not 22 years old and on, potentially recovery aids.
Yeah.
It's going to be tough.
No peds.
Yeah.
And you're not 18 years old anymore. Okay. So you're going to do that still. You're going to still do your compound lifts, but then you think hip thrusts. If all you did was barbell hip thrusts, you could easily do them every other day. They don't beat you up much. They would work you at short muscle lengths, and people will say, well, they don't grow. They work you at short muscle lengths. They're not as effective. Hold on now. We got 3 studies now. We have the Plotkin 2023. We have Cassiano 2023. And now we have Bartholomew 2024, all indicating that they're just as effective as stretch position movements. Okay? So the jury's out on glutes, for glute growth.
Yep.
So the jury's still out. We need more specific research, but it seems like they're just as effective. So if they don't beat you up as much and you can do more volume, why not add those in? The other thing is, it's like delts. How much delt volume could you handle per week? It's a different thing when there's different subdivisions. Like, yes, so every set of bench, incline, military dips that you do is front delt, and if you're in the frontal plane, it's side delt too. People think military press, if especially behind the neck press, activates the lateral delts very well. But technically every pull down and row you do works the rear delts. But I know personally, I grow my rear delts way better when I perform specific movements for them, and it's like noticeable. So anyway. Yes, you got all your compound lifts, but you could throw in, if all you were trying to do was grow your delts, you could probably do some isolation work for all 3 heads every other day. Now with the glutes, women want the shelf. They want their upper glutes too. Well, so there's the glute medius. That's a separate, glute medius and minimus is a separate muscle. So that volume that's separate volume. But also there's some evidence about, with regards to the upper and lower gluteus maximus. We need more research because the only training study was Plotkin, and it showed the same upper and lower glute growth versus between vertical and horizontal, but we have some EMG evidence, like when you put bands around your knees and do hip thrusts, it tends to activate the upper glute max, not the glute medius, by the way. Women will do it for the glute medius, and it doesn't activate the glute medius more. It activates the glute medius less, but it activates the upper glute max more, but not the lower glute max more. We're lacking a lot of research, but my point is you can do a lot of volume if your main goal is glutes. So quit thinking about bro splits. Quit thinking about, a man decided one day, look at the human body. Look at it. Imagine on an anatomy chart. Okay, I'm going to split this upper half into five different days. I'm going to split this lower half into just one day for everything.
Yeah.
Now you see some bodybuilders over the years who did break their lower body into a quad focus and a hamstring focus, but male bodybuilding is not about glute development now. And so most of the male bodybuilders, if you do steroids and train your legs, you end up with fine glute development. And then it's about getting shredded glutes. That's diet and conditioning. So they don't train for maximum glute hypertrophy. If they did, they would have separate glute days. And so they don't care about that. The women care about that. And then some men care about maximizing glute size, like me, a guy who never had any glutes.
Yeah.
That's why I became the glute guy. I had to study my butt off to grow them, because I'm like, I'm doing these exercises. I don't feel I'm working my glutes as well as I should. So that's the main difference with women. They want glute development is their number one goal. So they're going to train glutes 3 days a week, most of them.
Okay, you threw out so much gold right there. We're going to take a very long time unwinding and packing a lot of the things. There was a lot of terminology in there that I followed along with it, probably missed some people though. I want to make sure everything you just said, people can grasp how helpful and important that was. So we're probably going to spend a large chunk of the next few minutes here going back through some of those things. But to summarize the initial question, again, the context I laid out for you was women. This is the strength training side of the equation. This isn't mobility. This isn't necessarily body composition or fat loss or endurance. This is simply, if women want to lift weights and men want to lift weights, what are some of the things we should think about that differentiates them? And the case you made pretty eloquently there is oftentimes, certainly not every woman.
Real quick, this is important. I want to give some shout out, some credit. You said this is about hypertrophy mainly. This isn't about athleticism, but I would have never came up with these methods that I've popularized if it weren't for my strength coaching background.
We're going to get into that here right now.
Submerged into that world.
Yeah.
But they were doing 3 lower body workouts a week and recovering from them. I'm going, bodybuilders tell you to train legs 1 day a week. And I'm like, they're doing a knee dominant movement and a hinging movement every training session. And then they're doing glute activation work. And I'm like, why do you have to do glute activation work? Well, you have to wake up the glutes in all 3 planes. Why can't we turn those into strengthening movements? Why are we using little bands and doing 10 glute bridges? Let's load those suckers up. That's what gave me the idea. So anyway, it's interesting that I came up with my ideas of hypertrophy because of the strength coaching world, but keep going.
Yes. Okay. So the summary for training men versus women, in this case, what you're honing in on is the fact that we don't necessarily, on aggregate, as a general statement, not every woman, not every man, right?
Yes.
Just you're saying you've trained probably tens of thousands of women at this point, have been through your programs and things like that. What you're just saying is, on average, most people that have come through your systems want more glute development, want to have bigger glute muscles, where men also maybe want big glutes, but also want bigger arms and things like that. The other thing that you would want to think about here is there's often a case when women don't want hypertrophy in certain areas. So they will oftentimes want bigger glutes, but not want bigger thighs, right? So part of what you're talking about here and all the exercises and the methodologies you just laid out are ways that can help you potentially grow the glutes without also then growing the thighs and other parts. Did I have that?
And by the way, that was a blog post I wrote in 2010, and I realized this is a thing. And say you don't have big glutes and you're a woman, and then from the side view, I go and get your quads and hamstrings bigger.
Yeah.
And then your glutes don't grow. They look even smaller now. It's proportion.
Right.
And that's something that men can't seem to fathom, because why would you not want big quads and hammies? But if you have a certain aesthetic, a lot of Asian women that I've trained who have muscular quads, but then flat glutes. They don't want to do more squats. And I'm trying to get them to, I'm going, squats are good for your glutes. And they go, no, they grow my quads, Bret. You have me front squatting 155 and my quads are huge. I don't want to do squats anymore.
Yeah.
I've had to learn, I've learned this over many, many decades of training women. So you actually make their glutes proportionally look smaller when you do that. So it depends on if you train the thin person that needs muscle everywhere versus the person who has big legs and flat. And we all have the right to train. I mean, every man does it. So every bro has problem areas and strong points. And so you look at everyone who, people's training splits. Yeah. And we all have a preference that we throw in that makes our training unique compared to everyone else's.
Right. So you're not necessarily saying there's a difference in physiology or anything like that.
It's just goals.
It's the goals and being
the
specific
physiology, I think, you don't even really need to take that. Yes, you know all of it, all the differences in hormones and everything and the recovery differences and stuff, but I don't think that that has to change much at all. It's just a matter of preference. And then some women who are listening to this will be like, why would you not want to grow the quads and hammies? Or I don't care about glutes. I just want to be strong. And that's fine. But we're talking about the masses. Yeah. And most women, they look at the human body and they go, I want to split it up this way. They look at the lower body and say, I want to do that 3 times a week. And upper body, they typically do, some do none. Yeah. Some do twice a week, two upper body sessions. Some just do full body training and work it into their, I would say with my programs that are for like Booty by Bret, it's 3 full body days. But here's the deal. You do one press, one compound press, could be vertical, could be horizontal. You do one pull compound, whether it's a chin up, a pull down, or a row, and you do that 3 times a week, that beats what most of them are doing for body part split training. Yeah. And I don't want to go off on a big tangent here, but with like Booty by Bret, I will tell them, I want you getting 10 chin-ups eventually. And they're like, what? I can't even do 1. Well, keep doing negatives. But having that goal will do more for your upper body development than having your 1 back day a week where you do these wimpy pull downs and put it on 70 pounds. Yeah. Because that's what all my girls will want to just put on 60 and 70. They don't go to 80, 90. I'm like, what do you weigh? I weigh 130. Then you need to be doing 130. You want to be able to do chin-ups, you better be doing 130 for reps. Yeah. And anyway, but that tends to develop their upper bodies really, really well. And then, a lot of women, especially in bikini, they want the side delt, so throw in your lateral raises. But it depends on the women. But they tend to want to do upper body twice a week. And some of them will have a back day and a shoulder day. And I don't think that's as wise as having 2 upper body days because of frequency. But anyway, they always have at least 2 lower body workouts a week. Yep. Always 2, sometimes 3. And some girls go crazy and want to train glutes every day. I got creative in how to make that work because they're obsessed. Yeah. And I get it. We've all been there. But they're like, I want to train glutes every day. How could you do that? Well, it's doable. It's just you got to do more short muscle position stuff, more band work. And then people will say, bands suck. Okay, how come during COVID, people's upper glutes grew like crazy? Because they got a glute loop around doing tons of abduction because they're bored as hell. So they work.
Today's episode is sponsored by Momentous. Momentous makes the highest quality supplements on the market, period. Many of you know me, and you know that I do not trust the vast majority of supplement companies. And for good reason. Many studies have shown that anywhere between 10 to up to 40% of supplements have accidental contaminants, intentional alterations, mislabeling, or other serious issues. But Momentous is different. I literally spent years vetting the company, their products, and leadership team before personally officially partnering with them in 2023. Every single one of Momentous's products is third-party tested to ensure quality, and many are even NSF certified for sport. Now, while I love all of their products, the ones I use the most, both personally and with my clients, are what I call the big 3. And these are the omega-3 fish oil, creatine, and newly improved whey protein formula. These 3 supplements have fantastic data supporting their benefits. Whey protein for lean muscle mass, omega-3s for brain health, and creatine for both muscle and brain support. And they have been shown to be very safe across basically all populations of people, young, old, men, women, etc. Now, nobody has to use supplements, and I hope you never feel pressured to do so. But if you're interested in supplements, it's important that you get them from the highest quality providers. You don't want mercury in your fish oil or lead in your whey protein or anything like that. So that's why I stick exclusively to Momentous. If you'd like to give Momentous a try, go to livemomentous.com/perform to get 20% off your order. Again, that's livemomentous.com/perform to get 20% off. I'm very familiar with the Booty by Bret program. My wife does it. She loves it. It's 3 days a week of total body every day, and then you have
apologies
two.
if you have to listen to my voice, see if you hear it in the background.
I don't. No,
okay,
no. If anything, it helps me. It's 3 days a week total body, and then there's 2 additional bonus days that are just for the glutes that you do. So that's what you're referring to when your program is such that if you only want to do it 3 days a week, fine. If you also want to do 4 or 5, you can sort of add those things on. And the way that you've gotten around that, as you just mentioned, is those additional days, you just called it a pump. But it's non-damaging, non-fatiguing, things that will stimulate a little bit of growth, but it's not going to crush you for your next workout, because those 3 workouts are when you're getting your true maximal mechanical tension and stimuli and things like that. So I want to walk through that whole program, but before we go...
Side note on mechanical tension, I just called Brad up. I'm like, Brad, why do we say mechanical tension? What else could it be? Psychological tension? Let's drop the word mechanical. It's just tension.
Muscular
tension on the muscle. Why do we have to say mechanical? Yeah. Anyway, keep going.
Okay. All the way back though. You started off your career, you mentioned a little bit of your backstory. I've heard, before. You didn't have large glutes as a kid. You wanted to develop them, so you kind of got focused in this area. I said initially, where I had first saw your stuff was, again, I don't even know. Probably before 2010. I don't know, when did you start writing for things?
2009 for 2009,
right?
Yeah,
T-Nation stuff all the time over there. There's it's very funny. The strength conditioning nerds are gonna understand this. The rest of you probably won't. But these things like T-Nation were the only thing we had.
T-Nation was the
back in
greatest.
The day, right? And
the early 2000s.
Some of the articles were wild on there, and then there'd be people like you, and I'm like, my God, this is a dissertation. This is references.
All the top strength coaches, you wanted to be a top.
That's how you earned your stripes.
Yeah.
Actually, a little bit of a side note, you're the example I also give of people think that, wow, you got 1 million followers because you did it. No. You were famous in this whole field way before Instagram existed. From things like putting your chops in on those articles, speaking at scientific conferences, before you had a PhD. I don't even know if before you had a master's degree. But you were using science as best you could in application. So you spent, I don't know, what was it, at least 10 years just purely coaching and writing for the most part? You have probably 25 years of lifting yourself?
33 years of lifting, 28 years of coaching.
28 years of coaching. And this is a lot of high volume personal coaching. You have to be in the top 0.5 percentile of people with a PhD in the field in terms of coaching hours.
Yeah.
Not that many people there, right? So at what point in that journey did you get super focused on the glutes? You mentioned why the personal side. And then I'm going to ask this inflammatory on purpose. When did you, Bret Contreras, invent the hip thrust?
Okay, so...
And I'm a little bit smiling when I say that. I know some of the backstory, but I actually don't know the whole answer here.
Yeah, so. I think you'll be pleased to hear it. Okay, so... When I was 16 years old, so I'm 48. So when I was 16, it was 1992. I wanted to lift weights for 2 reasons, and maybe every guy does this in the beginning: to stand up to bullies and to get laid. I would look at my body in the mirror. My friends were like athletes, and they were developing, and I'm like, I'm this scrawny. What girl would ever want to see me naked? I wish I had the confidence that other people do, that don't care, that just have the gift of gab, and women love them. But I was insecure. I was like, why would anyone want to ever hook up with me? I'm so scrawny. And I hated being bullied more than anyone. I remember getting my, back when we grew up, it was kind of worse. Now I was a teacher for 6 years. I taught high school math for 6 years. It's not as bad.
Yeah.
They have anti-bullying policies, thank God. But back then, I'd have some kid come up and slam my head into the locker or something. And one time I was out at an event and then some guy's like, I don't want to hear you talk. If I hear you talk, I'm going to hit you in the face. And he was the toughest guy in the school. I didn't speak the whole night, and all of a sudden someone's like, Bret, and I'm like, I can't talk. And then I answered them, and he happened to be coming up, and he just hit me in the jaw. And I was like, oh, I wish I was bigger than him. I wish I could bully him, and that's what I really fueled me to start lifting weights. But I heard two specific instances. I heard these girls saying, I can't wait to go to football practice and watch the guys training. I love staring at their butts. And I'm like, oh, great. I'm going to be a 40-year-old virgin. You know, women want glutes. I look so bad from behind. My butt. And then the next story is I'm playing golf with my sister's boyfriend, bending over to swing. We're on the 9th hole, and he's like, and it's so funny because he became so descriptive. He was like, Bret, your back goes right into your legs. It's like you're missing the gluteal musculature. Most people have like a prominence that juts out, and your back goes right in your legs. And I'm like, why do you feel so comfortable talking about my biggest insecurity? I remember just going, I am not okay with this. I'm going to do something about this. So I started reading everything I could. And in the bodybuilding mags, you had just read their leg day. They didn't talk about glutes. It was, what does Ronnie Coleman do for his quads and hammies? Because they will not mention glutes. It's like he who's the muscle whose name shall not be mentioned. It's bizarre. They still to this day have this homophobic association with glutes and with hip thrusts. It's weird. I cover a lot of it on my Instagram, like my idols, Tom Platz, the first thing he ever posted on his Facebook page was drop the useless hip thruster. I'm like, he didn't want to make a post about it. He's my Tom Platz's legs.
Sure.
And like Lee Priest
I
just responded to an interview, and he's like bashing hip thrusts so bad. And if you're a man doing hip thrusts, take your tampon out. And it's funny. So I had to learn about glutes through other, basically through bodybuilders, but what they did for the leg days, but also through other resources. And when I was 19 years old, my cousin bought me this book, The Complete Guide to Butt and Leg Development. And that was 1995. I still have the book. It's on my coffee table in Vegas. I still flip through it. It's still in mint condition, but I read it. On Christmas, I just left the party and went into my room and read it for like 2 hours. Came back to the party. I'm like, this is my favorite present. How did you know? And he goes, dude, I've never met someone so obsessed with the glutes. And, it was 1995. And since then, my enthusiasm for glutes has never diminished. I'm still just as excited, but it was because I had no glutes. And no one becomes the glute guy if they just born with good glute genetics. Because if you have good glute genetics, guess what? You never need to do an isolation movement. You just squat. And then you're the guy going, LOL, just squat. Quit doing that stupid kickback. Quit doing that stupid exercise. Just squat,
Yeah, I'm going to be real honest. Like, that was definitely me for a good decade or more. That's a part of my physique that it, grows very easy and very well. And so I definitely dismissed much of these things. In fact, more than that, I was pretty aggressive earlier in my career. It's like, you don't need any of these things. Just squat, just squat. It took me age, like it does everybody else, to go, oh, you know what? Not everyone's like me. Right. So I don't need to emphasize glutes.
And as you age, you get injuries. Injuries are what taught me a lot. Half of what I know is by
working around stuff.
You get an injury and you work around stuff. You're like, oh my God, I like this. Or, oh my God, I came back stronger.
Yep.
I was missing something. So you asked about the hip thrust. So it's October 10th, 2006.
There's a date, exact date.
I'm watching UFC. UFC fights with my girlfriend at the time. Her name was Jeannie. And UFC fights in Phoenix, Arizona, or Scottsdale come on at like 9, 10 o'clock. So we're watching the fights, and I didn't care who won. It was Ken Shamrock versus Tito Ortiz, their third fight. I don't care who wins. I just want it to be a good fight because I like both of them.
I was in Phoenix on that fight, by the way.
Really?
That's crazy.
We were within a few miles of each other.
Yeah, I was at Athletes Performance.
Really?
So, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I know exactly where that was back before it was Exos or whatever.
Exos, yeah.
And so I'm watching the fights and I'm like, man, Tito, mounts him. And I'm like, Ken, do something. Don't just lay there. Because I had a twin brother growing up and we would always, grapple. And you'd straddle the person. You'd be bucking like a bronco. Eventually, you'd buck the person off. I had done a couple years of jiu-jitsu training. I know the jiu-jitsu guys can say, oh, if you have your hooks in, but in MMA, they don't have their hooks in. Right. You can, if you're really freakishly strong, a good hip bump or whatever they call it now, but a powerful glute bridge can help get you out of that. And glutes help in a lot of ways in MMA. But anyway, I started thinking at the time, I'm like, that should be an exercise. Now, at that time, I'm reading articles on T-Nation from Eric Cressy and these guys saying, do these glute bridges, and I would do them, and I'm like, I love these. I love the way it feels, but I could do 100. So I was going, how could you load that? Also, you're limited by the ground. How could you sink deeper? I went out to my garage. I had an idea, and I thought, I'm going to move my glute ham developer a few feet away from my reverse hyper. I called Jeannie. Jeannie, come out here, help me. She gets out there. She's like, why can't we do this tomorrow? And I'm like, fine, I'll do it myself. Yeah, I'll do it myself. And I'm trying to move this GHD across the floor, but I did it. And then I'm like, an average male weighs about 180 pounds. That's 4 45-pound plates. I didn't think of the idea to use the barbell for a long time. I took 4 plates, I put a dip belt, and it was so hard because I stood in the dip belt, tried to get up to my legs, and then I had to lay back on the glute ham developer, shimmy the weight belt up to my lap, and put my feet on the reverse hyper.
Oh, this is super safe.
Oh, God. They could split apart and you'd fall.
Immediately.
I know. I sunk all the way down, thrust it up. 1. I remember I got to like 15, and I felt my left glute start. I felt like I was gonna pull it. I was like, God, I'm worried I'm gonna tear this thing if I keep going. So I set the weight down, and I'm like, oh my God, I have a pump from 1 set. I had never felt that feeling before in 2006. And I went out to my front yard, looked up in the sky. I'm not religious. I'm not even very spiritual. And I looked up in the sky. I go, I'm going to spend the rest of my life making this exercise as popular as humanly possible. From this point on, my whole life changes. And I knew it. And it was just this random where your life is going this way, and now it's going this way. And so people will say, so this is crazy. So I start giving it to all my clients. I'm giving it with body weight. And then I'm like, figure out different ways to load it. And then my aunt says, I said, I want to write an article for T-Nation. I think I'm ready now. This is going to be my first article, which it was, Dispelling the Glute Myth. That was my first article.
That was your first one?
That was the article heard around the world.
Yeah.
Because I come out of the gate strong, and I said,
I didn't know that was your first one.
And so I'm like, this is the way you build your glutes. I have me hip thrusting 405. People around the world start doing it right away. That's the time when people would have said, this is awkward, Bret. We're doing that. That was heard around the world. T-Nation back then, they had that forum.
Yeah, of course.
I was meeting guys down the road, like when I went and got my PhD, this guy from New Zealand, this guy Sam, he's like, do you remember the day you posted that article? I went and did them. I did 405. And because he's a powerlifter, he's like, it was awesome. Do you remember that was me? So the very next day, guys in New Zealand, guys all over the world were doing it. If someone was doing them, that would have been the time. People would have been like, Bret, this is awkward. We're doing this here.
Oh.
No one was doing hip thrusts. They never existed. But now, the weirdest thing happened in the world. At that time, so it took me a while to think of using a barbell. I told my aunt about it. She goes, sounds like you need to invent something. And I go, I don't know how to invent anything.
Yeah.
And she goes, sure you do. You were always good at drawing. Draw some up right now. I did. I applied for a patent. I still have the patent. I don't enforce my patent. I could probably make an extra $2 million a year if I enforced it. I feel guilty because I want there to be as many hip thrust machines as possible. And so, but yeah, they're all
So you have the actual patent on the hip thrust?
I have the patent since I think I was awarded in maybe 2009. And you can pull it up. You can Google Bret Contreras patent. It comes up on Google. You can see my original patent, all my drawings. But it took me a while to think of the barbell hip thrust. So my first invention was a Skorcher. And it was like that idea, a rounded back pad. I had an angled foot plate, but it was this monstrosity. So I opened up lifts, my first gym in Scottsdale. That's all we did for hip thrust was always off the Skorcher, never anything else. And we did 3 types of hip thrust. We did band hip thrust because I said you need bands. and it needs to be anchored low. So there's tension at the start
Yep.
and tension at the top. So the thing was elevated, and then there was band tension from way down low. But you get to the top, and it was like insane. So we did band hip thrusts, we did single leg hip thrusts, and I gave a unit to Gunnar Peterson. He trained J-Lo back then. He's like, Bret, this is J-Lo's favorite exercise, but you need handles on this. I wonder if he remembers this. You need handles on this so they don't wobble around. So I put handles on the unit. It was great. Single leg hip thrusts off the Skorcher are amazing because it actually changes the strength curve. It's hardest at the bottom.
Yeah.
And you can do that off 2 benches. If you get 2 benches and you actually go all the way down to where your butt touches the ground and then comes up, it is hard off the bottom.
Yep.
So we would do single leg sinking really deep coming up, and then we'd do barbell, but the barbell was hilarious. This is what we did in my first gym. Trainer on this side, trainer on this side. So we'd have to have, every time someone did barbell hip thrust, they'd be like, Coach, I'm ready. And we'd have to run over. We'd be training like 10 people at a time. We'd run over, 2 trainers pick the barbell up. The person slides underneath, gets in position, drop it in their lap. They do their set of hip thrusts. Then we pick the barbell, you get out of it. And we did that for 2 years. And by the way, I remember when I said, why can't you use the barbell? The thing is, it would hurt. You need padding. And I Googled thick bar padding. I Googled this in 2008. And Hampton was the only one making this thick barbell pad for squats. And that became, so I made Hampton a lot of money until people started making their own.
Oh, wow.
Squat sponge. The squat sponge came out, and then we started making ours. And but people also use the Eric's balance pads. So we'd use those too. Those were the game changer for the hip thrust. So, all right. So now I decided to write an ebook, because blogging was popular back in the day. You blogged, but you needed a moneymaker. So I made an ebook. I'm like, I can't be telling people do these hip thrusts off the Skorcher. They don't have a Skorcher. How can I make this mainstream? Well, they could do it off a bench. When you've only done the Skorcher, and then you do it off the bench, you're like, I don't feel it on my hammies.
Yeah.
I don't feel like I'm sinking deep enough. It just doesn't feel right. But then you get used to it. So whatever you do the most, you like, and then everything else kind of feels weird.
Right.
But anyway, we started doing off the bench because I'm like, I need to teach everyone how to do it using regular equipment. No one did a barbell hip thrust off a bench for a couple years. Now, I didn't just think of the barbell hip thrust. I also thought of the barbell glute bridge and the single leg hip thrust. And you're sitting here going, Bret, you're looking me in the face saying no one ever did a single leg hip thrust. No one ever sat on a bench and did a single leg hip thrust. At least there's no evidence of it. Now, okay, so prove me wrong. So when I wrote my glute ebook, I did my research. You know, I'm a researcher.
Yeah.
I'm not lazy. I searched for a whole week of my life, like 8 hours a day. I thought of every term you could come up with. For the first term could be pelvic, floor, supine, glute, hip, whatever. And then the second term could be raise, lift, thrust, bridge, push up. And I did every combination of those. And I searched 30 pages deep. I'd go to forums and search. I did see someone glute bridging a keg. I found later on, I found some evidence. So if you're a Bret Contreras hater, I'm going to give you 4 pieces of evidence you can use against me. Okay. The first piece is the evolution of the bench press. So I have this book from 1924, Super Strength by Alan Calvert. And it's 101 years old. And so anyway, real quick, I'm gonna fast forward to modern day. If I made a post right now, like if you post this clip, if we were to collaborate on a post, there would be at least 10 people that write, LOL, I was doing those in the 90s.
Yeah.
I was doing those in the 2000s. And they remember it that way. I'm not doubting that they think that. I'm not saying they're lying. They don't have good memory. They were doing that after 2009.
Yeah.
You know? They'll be like, my dad was doing that. And I always say, okay, I'm a historian. I would love to talk to the people. How'd you do it?
Yeah.
What padding did you use?
Yeah.
What set and rep schemes? How frequently? How strong were the people? But there's no evidence. And what they will always say, this is crazy to me, because we've reached a period of time where people are so insanely stupid that they think that we don't have history of anything before camera phones.
Yeah.
So I'll say, prove it. Like, give me evidence. I'll send out a newsletter to, hey, turns out I didn't invent the hip thrust. This person did. I will give credit. And they'll go, LOL, like we had camera phones back then. And I'm like, oh my God, I have a book that's 101 years old with 200 pictures in the back of it in black and white.
Yeah.
100 years ago, we had cameras. We brought cameras to the gym. We have a whole history before camera phones exist. And these people are so it's like inexplicable how insanely stupid they are. They are the dumbest. So anyway,
it's not that you necessarily maybe didn't invent the hip thrust, but you have yet to find any evidence.
Beyonce's trainer invented the hip thrust in 2003. That's the only evidence I have.
Okay.
She used a stability. Okay, so I'll go for the 4 pieces. Number 1 is Beyonce in 2003. She's on a VHS. Is that the VH1? VH1.
There you go.
MTV's, the MTV channel, like the counterpart. VH1 had a series called Rockin' Bodies. And someone sent me this and I'm like, this was after 2006. No, it was not. And she's on a stability ball and she's got a little barbell and she's doing hip thrusts. That's the only time I've ever seen a barbell hip thrust being performed, but it is with like a 30-pound barbell.
Yeah.
And she doesn't have the best form, but I'd never seen it until, I didn't see that until a few years ago. So you could say Beyonce's trainer, it shows her in the video.
Yeah.
There's a little extra. So whoever this is, she could be given credit for inventing the hip thrust.
You could find her name, right.
And then if you look at the book, that book I told you about in 1995, it has pelvic raises. It shows glute bridges and single glute bridges, but it doesn't show them with weight. But if you go to the back of the program, the back of the book has programs, and it says in one part, weighted pelvic raises.
Okay.
But it doesn't show how to weight it.
Gotcha.
Now, that would be off the ground, but that would be a weighted glute bridge or whatever, but it doesn't say how. No, you look at the book Super Training by Mel Siff.
Yep.
This is a classic.
Yep.
Classic. There is some pictures from 1977 credited to Yuri Verkhoshansky, this Russian sports scientist, rest in peace. And these are all hip thrusts. It looks like Kama Sutra drawings, but they're all hip thrusts. And you can see these are single leg hip thrusts. There's one, the person against a bench and they're pushing against their hips. That's an isometric hip thrust. And then there's single leg where you got your foot on a kettlebell on your foot and you're doing single leg hip thrusts. And there's special exercise to develop sprinting. Who would have known that 50 years later, we now have evidence that hip thrusts are actually better for sprinting than the vertical hip extension exercises. So that was ahead of its time. But these are hip thrust variations. And then another piece was from the late 1800s, early 1900s, the invention of the bench press. So they didn't always have benches. So what they first started in the strongmen back then, they'd have to kind of do a pullover and press. You just were laying on the ground. You just had to get the bar over your head.
Yep.
Then they started making bigger discs and you could roll it over, which is what I ended up doing with BC Strength with hip thruster plates, even bigger. But back then they had to get it over their head and then they do a press. And then people started realizing so it was like, Arthur Saxon had the record, and then like George Hackenschmidt, and then this Joe Nordquist, and he did it he would elevate because you could bend, if you turn it into a glute bridge and turn it into decline, you were even stronger.
Yep.
And then some guys started realizing, hell, I'm just going to, they call it a belly toss.
Yeah.
So they would put it on their belly and toss it up and lock it out. So then that was the belly toss method. And then some guy named George Lurich, he was so flexible, he could just go and bridge it all the way up to lockout, put his hips down.
Oh, nice.
And then at that point, they're like, this isn't even using pressing muscles. This is silly. So the powers that be, Hoffman, what is Hoffman's name?
Bob Hoffman.
Bob Hoffman.
Yep.
Bob Hoffman decided, this is stupid. Let's get away with all this.
Yeah.
Let's just do this strict floor press, and that's when benches started coming along. So they were doing like belly tosses, but for 1 rep, not for reps, and it wasn't with the goal of building glutes. It was to have a stronger bench. which is what you'll see high school kids doing now in gyms, doing anything they can to get a stronger bench press.
Right.
And interestingly, back then, bench press is some of the same criticisms are what you see of hip thrusts today. Quit being they were a lazy man's exercise.
Right.
Standing exercise are functional.
Overhead
This
press.
is how you build
Yeah.
the real functional muscle. Who wants to artificially expand the pecs? These aren't, functional muscles. The real muscles are your shoulders and your
Overhead
biceps,
press,
and you should be doing curls and overhead presses. Who lays down to do an exercise?
Yeah.
And then bodybuilders, started doing the bench. And then it took off, and then, but it was criticized in the beginning, and it's going to be bad for your posture. It's going to be non-functional. It's going to lead to injury, and then people ignored them, and then it now is the most popular exercise today. And the same thing is happening with hip thrusts now with the invention of these plate-loaded devices and these selectorized devices. Those are the best-selling pieces of equipment right now.
Yeah.
It's like, you're a modern gym, the ladies want the hip thrust machines.
I would be hard-pressed to believe nobody in the history of the world ever did a loaded hip thrust before Bret Contreras. But
of course.
That's not what you're really
people.
saying.
Well, that's why I tell people then, because I had a coach tell me he was doing it. I go, how come you never posted about it? Why didn't you didn't realize it was going to be popular?
Yeah.
It's just like, that's the way history works.
Yeah. It just wasn't very popular at all before you. So at minimum, we could say you were the one that brought it to the lexicon.
Sure.
You were not doing it in every gym. It was not, certainly in studios. Now you can't go to a gym that doesn't have a hip thrust machine of some kind.
Yeah.
Right?
So and no one will argue that Bret Contreras popularized it. I just don't like basically being called a fraud, as if I take credit for something I never did. In fact, back in the day, people were like calling it the Contreras hip thrust, or two bloggers calling it the CHT. And I'm like, don't make it about me. I want this to be popular on its own. Everyone knows I invented it. And then now, no one knows I invented it because the world changed. Social media kind of became a copycat game. Back in our day, we gave credit. We always gave credit. If you didn't give credit, you were, dead in your tracks.
Totally. Today's episode is brought to you by Parker University. Parker is the only university in the world dedicated exclusively to human performance. It's also my new academic home. I first heard of Parker after attending their NeuroCon seminar and was stunned. I've been to countless clinics and conferences, and nobody is even close to Parker seminars. The speakers, the setup, and the total experience are frankly jaw-dropping. All their seminars are great, but the upcoming Las Vegas show, which is going down March 20th through 22nd, is going to be extra special. It's featuring speakers like Doctors Andrew Huberman, Tommy Wood, Gabrielle Lyon, and more. But on top of that, I'm personally hosting a co-seminar at the same time. So imagine going to a phenomenal lecture on how the nervous system works, then popping over and lifting some weights with me personally, grabbing lunch, and then settling in for a talk on how NASA scientist Cody Burkhart is preparing human bodies for life on Mars. Tickets for this incredible event are on sale now at a special rate of only $599. But this price will increase as the dates get closer, so do not wait. And yes, you heard that right. $599 gets you full access to the entire Parker seminar, expo hall, nightlife, and social events, plus 2 full days of learning and lifting weights with me in the gym and my friend Dan Garner. To see the exact schedule, list of speakers, and get signed up, visit parkerseminars.com. One more time, that's parkerseminars.com. I can't wait to see you there. Okay, so really fast, before we go into some more details about how to train and some of the things, walk me through the difference between a hip thrust and a glute bridge. You mentioned single leg glute bridges. You mentioned different loading strategies. For people that are thinking like, I don't know the difference here, what is that difference again between a glute bridge, a hip thrust, and why does it matter?
If you're on the ground, it's a glute bridge. You can do that one leg, two legs. Best way to do it is off the Smith machine though, because you're on a bench, it's plate loaded. You just load the plates up and you can go all the way down to the ground. You can always sit on the bench. Sometimes if the plates, if you're a smaller person, you don't even get to touch down before the plates touch down.
Yep.
Okay.
So your back is on the ground, your feet are on the ground, and you're elevating your hips up in the air and with some load on your hips.
Yep.
That's a glute bridge.
That's a glute bridge.
One leg, two leg,
and if you elevate your feet from that position, it's a foot elevated glute bridge.
So you put your feet up on a bench.
Yep.
Which allows you to get your hips up higher and
increase the range of motion, but doesn't increase the quad activity.
Right.
If you elevate your shoulders, that's a hip thrust.
So now you're putting your back up on a bench or something like that,
You put your back up on a bench. And now if you elevate both your shoulders and feet, that's a dual elevated or foot elevated hip thrust.
Yep.
So yeah, basically hip thrusts are going to build your quads a little bit more, probably. If you want all glute growth and no quad, no hamstring, no adductor, then the glute bridge is probably your lift. Because the thing is, you could say do kickbacks, do these exercises, but these are not exercises easy to progressively overload over the years. Glute bridges you can, and hip thrusts, that's why they're so effective. They're very conducive to progressive overload. Same with squats, deadlifts, and bench press. The most effective exercises, you can keep loading them. You can have a standardized range of motion, a way to perform it. You do it this way every time. When you get stronger, you're utilizing progressive overload. You should be growing muscle over time. Yes, there are neural effects and coordination effects, but you should grow muscle over time. And that's why I say, make it a goal to hip thrust 315 for 20. That's your best bet to getting glutes. And people
315 pounds for 20 reps for a 250-pound man.
So it doesn't matter. Yeah, it's kind of crazy because you think every other lift, you're like, well, size matters. What do they weigh? But I've found that when you're bigger, like hip thrust, it's easier to hip thrust when you're smaller. It's just more comfortable. When you're bigger, your belly gets in the way. You're just cramped in there, and body weight adds to it. So I would like to say, maybe 2.5 times body weight for 20 reps, but really 315 for 20 is very simple. Probably the best metric if there had to be one. But obviously with genetics, genetics
I
are 60%.
I want to linger on that really fast. Again, what you're saying is you personally, having trained, again, thousands, if not tens of thousands of individuals, not NFL players, 90% female, probably most of them sub 200 pounds. One or two of them have ever been able to hip thrust 315 for 20? Like how many?
Every client I have can.
Every client you have.
And not just, all right, you go to an Olympic weightlifting gym. What are you going to see?
Snatches and clean and jerks.
Well, what? The equipment.
Oh, yeah. You're going to see barbells.
You're going to see
plates,
squat stands.
Yeah.
Platforms.
Power racks. That's it. Yeah.
What are you going to see if you go to Glute Lab? Hip thrust stations. In San Diego, we've got like 12 against the wall, just against the one wall on the AstroTurf. That's what we do here. And the other thing is, if you trained at Westside back in the day, do you think you would have been stronger?
Yeah.
Well, if you train at Glute Lab, you think your 315 for 5 is impressive. And then you look at these girls and they're freaks.
Yeah.
Freaks. They're doing 495. They're doing 585.
Didn't you have a girl just do 800 or something like that?
So I've seen one legit 800-pound hip thrust from a woman. Her name was Daria. Now, the problem is people don't lock it out. Full legit lockout. I've been watching hip thrusts, millions and millions of reps. I'm very skilled at seeing, did you reach full hip extension? They have these Guinness Book of World Records and like contests now you see, and I get tagged in them. I'm like, they didn't even come close to locking it out.
Yeah. You
got to reach full hip extension. This girl, Daria, she did 810 or 800. I think it was 800, legit in training. She did one of my StrongLifting competitions. The thing is, hip thrusts are last. So you've already done squats and deads. She didn't get 7. I think it was like 735 or something.
Nonetheless, call me still impressed at 700-pound
but my
hip
client
extension.
Carly, she hit 765, legit, full lockout.
Yeah.
One of the coolest experiences of my life. And I think she could have done 800. There's another girl, Katie Soniero, I think could get to an 800-pound hip thrust, legit. She's doing the rotisserie one now. That's using the rotating pad. That's on my,
that slides with, yeah.
That's on my thruster 3.0. The girls like it more. That also changes the torque angle curve to where it's hardest off the ground. The lockout becomes easy.
Oh, because you can roll back.
Yeah, it just changes it to where I did it the other day because I did it for the first time. It was always hard at the bottom. It feels I got a belly, you know, I'm too wedged in. So I did it with bands, and I think I did 405 for 12, and my client Dre is like, "LOL, coach, I'm stronger than you." I'm like, "Dre, it's my first time I did them. I'm still stronger than you. I hope I'm stronger. I'm literally twice your size." So I did it again, and it's really hard at the bottom, and then it gets easier as you come up. It's really different. In fact, at the top, I'm like, I feel like I'm going to tip over. You're kind of scared that you're going to flip over. But that's an interesting debate because now you're changing. So with that rotating pad, a lot of the men who criticize the hip thrust say, well, it's easy at the bottom, hardest at the top. Well, you can make it with this design. You can change that around.
Yep.
But anyway, now there's that Katie's doing like 900 pounds for 4 reps or something. It's crazy. Or yeah, maybe it's 800 for 4, but she's crazy.
It's a lot.
Anyway, women can get stronger than men at this. I would love to, relatively stronger. I have never seen a man legit lock out 1,000. Well, maybe this guy, I posted it. There's one guy who looked like he had a legit lockout, but you see the strongest powerlifters in the world, they never lock it out.
Yep.
And they're doing they can get to 700-800 pounds, but it's really interesting. And I think it has to do with that women have possibly better leverage at lockout, especially with their adductors, some of their muscles, but maybe their glutes can probably get relatively maybe a little bit bigger, or at least they're training glutes 3 times a week. It's going to get bigger.
Yep.
But I think they're maybe because they're not training their hamstrings and everything too. So their lockout strength, it tends to be amazing. And I always think it's funny 10 years ago, I'd have all these girls that are like, I saw this bodybuilder in the gym. And of course, that bodybuilder has a crush on one of my girls. So they're flirting, and then they see him doing hip thrust or glute bridge, and they're like, oh, let me see if I can do it. And they can't do it. And that's because they have strong glutes down deep in a hips flexed position.
Totally.
They can do half reps for days, but then you have them come up all the way and lock it out. They lack that lockout strength, which is something you will hear, what's his face? Nautilus inventor, Arthur Jones talk about how when people would start to use the machines, they're so strong in the stretch position.
Yep.
They're so weak here. It takes them a while to, they're so weak here. There's this massive imbalance throughout the range of motion. So, So I do think that there are some anatomical differences that make women stronger at hip thrust, but also just comes down to, for women, the hip thrust is their bench press.
Yeah,
Yeah,
of course.
Guys ask you how much you bench, women, how much you thrust,
Right. Yeah. So you've mentioned now a handful of anatomical terms, and you've peppered in a little bit about how to train them differently, but I want to complete that picture if we can. So just give me the really basic overview of the glute anatomy, right? The couple of different muscles there. And then what I really want to get to on that is, how do I train them differently if I need to? So if I want my glutes to get bigger, do I need to be having bands? Should I not use them? Like, give me that whole picture of saying, okay, Bret, I want my butt bigger. All I have to do is hip thrust? Do I need to add anything else? What are adductors? Complete that whole picture about what am I looking at anatomy-wise, and then what implications do I have for training?
Okay. So anatomically, you have attachments at the ilium, the sacrum, and the coccyx. Mostly the sacrum. The glute max will
tailbone. Right.
Yeah, attaches a little bit to the pelvis, and then the sacrum, and a little bit to the coccyx, and then it inserts onto the gluteal tuberosity of the femur, but also onto the IT band. And it's
so your
like
glutes attached to the back of your thigh, like the back of your thigh muscle.
Kind of the lateral edge of it, though.
Right.
There aren't many muscles like the glutes. It's like a quadrilateral. Is that, why don't I remember this? I used to teach geometry.
Sounds good.
It's almost rectangular shaped in a way.
Right. Well, if we contrast this, to the quadriceps muscle groups, those all come into the patella.
They taper in.
Have one insertion point on that front of your knee. That's that knob down there.
Yeah.
So what you're talking about is the glutes are different because they don't have that single point of landing.
It's a broadly
big fan of attachment.
So because they attach to the femur and pelvis and sacrum, that alone is a big deal. But now you look at their fascial attachments. So first of all, there's some fascial attachments to the pelvic floor, giving it some implications with that kind of like urinary incontinence, like the pelvic floor function.
Right.
Then you have the attachment onto the IT band, which then attaches down to the tibia. So now it's almost like that can be considered a tendon.
Yep.
So it makes it, that would make it a biarticular muscle, you know?
Yeah, meaning it's going to both extend your hip and rotate it out, right? Because it is attached to the outside
if it attaches to the tibia, not just, all right, like, okay, so you're talking about when it contracts. I'll get to that in a second.
Okay.
But it also attaches to the thoracolumbar fascia, to the glute medius fascia. A lot of stuff kind of blends in together. So if you consider the thoracolumbar fascia into the lat and the lat on to the arm, you've got kind of the glute max possibly affecting things up and down the chain from the arm to the lower leg.
To your back shoulder, right?
Yeah. So for that reason, these people tend to over exaggerate and act like, you know, these like anatomy trains and stuff, and the fascia is everything, and these myofascial meridians and everything. But I do think if you took a step back and looked at the human muscular anatomy chart or like picture, you'd be like, the glutes are the keystone. They are the keystone muscle. That's why I'm okay being the glute guy. I would not want to be the pet guy. The glutes are the keystone. They're the
Plantaris guy.
Yeah. So they affect a lot of things, and it's like that centerpiece. So then you look at the subdivisions. Okay, so the glute medius, that's been separated into anterior and posterior subdivisions. It probably has anterior, middle, and posterior. Glute medius isn't talked about that much, but it's people act like you can target them one or the other, and the glute medius overlaps the glute minimus. How do you target? They'll be like, kick out at this angle for glute med and this angle for glute min.
Right. So you've got glute max is the big one we think of as your glutes,
max,
right?
is, so the glute med and min are up or outer?
Up and outside, right below your hip bone there.
Yeah. And then the glute max is a diagonal shaped, and the fiber directions are, you know, around 40 degrees-ish. They change between, I can't remember, there's a couple papers looking at the exact fiber directions, but it's like, and then when it contracts, you can see bodybuilders squeezing their glutes, posing, they become pretty horizontal.
Yep.
So people will say, I've heard people say, oh, glute max is just a hip extensor. It's just, if it was just a hip extensor, why wouldn't they be more vertical?
Yeah.
They do three things. They abduct, but it's only the upper fibers that abduct.
Yep, meaning it takes your leg away from your midline.
Yeah, frontal plane abduction.
Yep.
So frontal plane abduction, if you're standing up, think jumping jacks.
Yep, there you go.
You're abducting the legs. So the upper glute max fibers abduct. But the glute med and min are the main abductors. TFL as well, but glute med is like an amazing abductor, super strong at abduction, frontal plane. The lower glute max, there's evidence that it's an adductor, but I have not found any EMG activity with adduction. Now, here's what's interesting. Okay, there's the upper and lower subdivisions of the glute max. They seem to be activated uniquely through EMG. And the whole glute max externally rotates. The whole glute max extends the hip, but only the upper abduct. Some people say the upper is more effective in external rotation. I think it's the entire glute max is very effective in hip external rotation. And when we swing a bat, you think, because I used to just think of these things as distinct actions. Think about swinging a bat. You're loaded up, kind of in the stretch position a little bit, and then you contract the glutes. It does three things. You are going to extend the hips, you are going to abduct the hips, and you are going to rotate laterally the hips. They do all three things at once during swinging, striking, throwing. So that's what they're called triplanar. Now, when you bend over and you're in deep hip flexion, now the glute med and min are not, their moment arms change where they're not even very effective at abducting the thigh anymore.
Yep.
Maybe the posterior are, but not the middle and anterior. But now the glute max becomes a better abductor of the thigh.
Yeah, so if you think about this, like if you were to be standing up vertical, and I just said, do it, the jumping jack action, right?
Yeah.
This is where you're lifting your leg out to the side. If you were to do this as a common exercise where you like lay on your side and you lift your leg up in the air, right? Now, in that position, what you're saying is those small upper glute muscles, glute medius, glute minimus, things like that, might be adding to that action. But if you were to bend forward and now, so like I'm standing here and I'm hinging forward, I'm doing an
like
RDL.
a seated hip abduction.
Seated hip thing.
Leaning forward.
Now if I do it, those muscles aren't really active anymore.
Yeah.
Now that entire action has to come from my glute max, right?
Well, I think
or likely.
When you said from the sideline, the glute med is the main hip abductor.
There you go.
No argument about it. From bent over position, I think the posterior subdivision would be activated well. You're going to get some activation of the hip external rotators now become horizontal plane abductors and also the glute max.
Yep.
How efficient are those at building them? We don't know. But I do include those in the program.
Yep.
So now you said, how do I build glutes? Well, because the glutes have, first of all, the glute max has upper and lower subdivisions. And some people will even say there's the iliac fibers, the sacral fibers, and the coccygeal fibers.
Yep.
They might even separate the glute max between 3 subdivisions, but definitely an upper and lower. And then the glute med has multiple subdivisions. The glute min, to maximally develop them, you're going to combine a lot of different actions. There's 2 studies, one looking at the glute size of Olympic weightlifters. And it shows that their glute max is larger than than sedentary subjects, but their glute med and min are not. Meaning squats do not grow your glute med and min. Also, the Plotkin study showed that squats and hip thrusts, neither one of them grew your glute medius and minimus. If you want to grow your glute med and min, you should treat it like any other muscle and train it dynamically through a full range of motion. And there's one guy, this Chasm, pointed out that we're all doing abduction straight out to the side.
Yep.
You really should look at the pelvic shape and kind of go in the plane of the glute medius, which is diagonal at 30 degrees. If you look at how the pelvis is shaped and how the glute medius, you should kick out. The problem is it's really hard for people to get that right.
Yeah.
You have a nice way of showing it in like an instructional video. You look overhead and you tell them, turn this foot in and then drive back. But it's really hard. People, they end up bending over.
Yep.
And then they're involving the glute max more. So it's really hard. And then do their foot go in front or in back? And then they end up so I have ways of teaching it. But basically, for sometimes when people keep screwing up, I'm like, just go straight out to the side.
Yeah.
But because the glute med and min have multiple subdivisions, you probably should do different angles of abduction.
Yeah.
You should go straight out to the side. You should go at a 30-degree angle back. You should also do maybe seated hip abduction straight up.
Mm-hmm.
Might develop the posterior heads more. But also on the seated hip abduction machine, bridge up. Do them bridged and do them leaning forward. Because leaning forward for the glute max, bridged up, you could put blocks like yoga blocks underneath you or just maintain the bridge position for the glute med. Okay, what about glute max? You're going to get the most bang for your buck with hip extension. Hip extension exercises take them through the most range of motion. But now you start talking about how to put together the most comprehensive program. I know in 10 years, especially if I team up with you and we start doing studies using this MRI stuff, but God, we have a lot of questions that remain. So right now, my optimal program, the scientific studies we have to guide us are few.
Yeah.
We've got, Kubo from 2019 showing deeper squats are better than shallow squats. But
for glute
max growth. But that just looked at knee angle. They were probably
hinging over and
they were the beginners doing the shallow squats were probably staying vertical.
Yep.
And we don't have a study looking at super deep squats versus parallel. I think parallel would either be more effective or same. I don't think you need to go past parallel for glute growth. There's 2 studies on quads showing you deeper is not necessary. That Kubo study showed the same quad growth, but it showed greater adductor and glute growth going deep. Yep. And then so that's the study that people cling to about glutes being worked more in the stretch. Right. There's also an unpublished study that I don't know why it's not published yet, by Mao, showing kickbacks grow more glute in the stretch position, but it's a straight leg kickback, kind of weird. Who does straight leg kickbacks? You're not stretching it the most. You're not.
Yeah.
And they only went to neutral. They didn't go into hip hyperextension. So that doesn't have a lot of ecological validity with like how we do things in the field. So the best, anyone who's scientific right now, who trains people in real life and works with people and then also tries to incorporate the science, all right? This is what a reasonably, because you get these crazy, in every aspect of social, like every field, there's these politics, you look at anything, even in your world, more the physiology and performance world, you'll get these coaches saying this way and this way.
Yeah.
You'll get people saying, just train glutes in the stretch position. Every muscle grows best from the stretch position. But that's a fascinating area. I have every study on it, categorized into the folders. The verdict is not out on every exercise, and depends how, if you're a beginner or trained, and how long is long enough. But what that whole category of research has not looked at is combining them into like basically what you can recover from. Because it might be that if you just could do one set a week, what would be the best thing to do? Maybe it'd be a set of walking lunges to failure.
Yeah.
All right. If you can do 2 sets. Now, what if you have all the time in the world and you don't mind doing whatever it takes? Well, then I would say train 3 days a week at least. But what if you could do hip thrusts every day? You'd probably get some people developing overuse injuries. But my point is, you could recover from that. Would that be more effective than training long muscle lengths twice a week? Yes, it wouldn't be as efficient, or possibly wouldn't be as efficient, but you could recover from way more. What if you don't create any muscle damage after a while and you just stimulate hypertrophy and you can expedite the rate at which new muscle is laid down? We don't know. There's a lot of these questions we don't know yet. So right now, train the glutes 3 days a week and follow the rule of thirds. The rule of thirds is something I came up with to illustrate this concept. When you're doing vertical exercise, those are the most demanding on the central nervous system. Well, it's funny because if you've seen the research on that, we really don't have a lot of evidence that it's more demanding on the central nervous system.
Yeah, I'll hold my tongue, but go ahead.
We need evidence of that because people know what it means.
By vertical exercise, you're meaning squats, things like that,
Squats,
right?
deadlifts, lunges, step-ups, Bulgarian
up and
split
down.
squats, skater squats, pistol squats, good mornings, and all their variations.
Yep.
Those are the vertical exercises. The horizontal are hip thrusts, glute bridges, your single leg hip thrusts, your back extensions, 45-degree hypers, your kickbacks.
Yep.
But within those, this is what makes it so complicated. You can make things more knee dominant or more hip dominant. Even kickbacks. What if you did kneeling kickbacks?
Yeah.
Then it becomes like a step up. So I'm talking about an upright kickback.
Yeah.
So and then a back extension off a GHD is horizontal. That's pure horizontal. 45 is halfway between, but we call it horizontal because it works the squeeze position more than the stretch.
Yeah.
Those exercises do not beat you up. In fact, after you've done them for a while, they don't beat you up much at all. They don't create nearly as much muscle damage. So those can be done more frequently and with more volume. And then lateral exercises, those are like penalty-free volume because you never do too much. Those are going to work more of your glute medius and stuff. If you lean forward, yes, you're going to work more glute max, but they don't beat you up. We just do, 2 to 6 sets at the end of depending on someone's goals, typically at the end of the workout. But if someone really wants to grow their upper glutes, I might say start with abduction. I mean, think about it. If you're really wanting to grow your upper glutes, begin with a frontal plane abduction movement and maybe end with one.
Yep.
So then you do the rule of thirds. You do around. And then here's another simple system. 3 times a week, pick one exercise from 4 categories. The first category is your thrust bridge. And this could be in any order. The second is your squat lunge. And when I say squat lunge, it means split squat, step up, single leg press. And then you pick a hinge. And the hinge, this is where it's it could be vertical, like an RDL. It could be like a 45-degree hyper. It could be a reverse hyper, but it's more straight-leggedy hip extension. And then pick an abduction movement. The abduction could be frontal plane. It could be horizontal plane leaning forward. It could be hip external rotation still. So I call it abduction, like lateral rotary. So you do your vertical, your horizontal, your lateral rotary, but pick an abduction, but also include an abduction. There aren't many hip external rotation exercises. We do 2 of them. The cable cuff where you spin, those are hard to master. They're hard to teach. But anyway, when you do that system, you will fully develop your glute max and glute med and min. Because when
If
you
you
do
pick one from each of those four, that's
and
how
do
you
it 3
develop
times a week.
3 times a
Don't
week.
do the same exercise every time. That's
Lots
boring.
of variation to make sure
Yeah.
if there is an effect of range of motion, if there is an effect on activation, that
Yes.
you're covering all your bases.
And it's more fun. And that's when I see people be like, just do RDLs. Do you imagine these girls train 3 times a week? First of all, you can't recover from doing squats and RDLs 3 times a week with intensity, with sufficient effort. But also, it's boring, and it's you better be throwing in single leg RDLs that are not as taxing on the low back.
Yeah.
So what I found is you cannot do too much. These guys that are telling people, here's a science-based glute workout. They don't train women, because I'm telling you, most of them train 3 days a week. They train lower body 3 days a week. These programs would crush people, would absolutely crush these women. I get carried away sometimes. So I don't do drop sets anymore. I don't do these crazy burnouts. I don't do crazy supersets. I'm not trying. I even do lower reps now than I used to, because we used to get carried away. I even used to do like sumo deadlifts with the deadlift bar and touch and go. That's these girls can. I had girls doing 315 back in San Diego. Ashley got 19 reps. Dominique got 11 reps. Like, because touch and go, you can bounce that bar up.
You can move.
Everyone's cheering you on. Cool, you did something good, and then you're sore for like a week.
A month.
You can't duplicate that for a month. Because you're so beat down. And that's what I mean. So maybe it's muscle damage. Maybe it's like damage to fascia, to discs. Something Chris Beardsley pointed out to me. When you do a conventional deadlift, you're doing a concentric lift, right? But what happens to the erectors? You line up in the arch. You go to pull, the hips shoot up a little, the back rounds a little bit, you pull it up. Before the bar left the ground, the erectors went into an you're activating it went into an eccentric, so that can create more damage, something about the spine. When you really do squats to failure, deadlifts to failure, those beat you up. So you need a good mix within those categories. Within the squat lunge category, some should be bilateral, some should be unilateral, some should be more quad dominant, some should be more hip dominant, meaning you can do a high bar squat with the feet elevated, but that's going to be more quad. You can also do a low bar vertical shin box squat sitting back, that's more hip dominant. And then so you want to have variety within those. With the deadlifts, you want to do, sometimes you might do a conventional sumo deadlift, sometimes an RDR or stiff leg deadlift, but sometimes single leg variations, single leg, and even good mornings. You can do good single leg good mornings off the Smith machine. You can get good at good mornings too. People say they're dangerous, but that's because they don't start off light and work their way up. Good mornings are good variations to do, but the hinge variations should mix between deadlift and good mornings, and then also 45s and reverse hypers and back extensions. And then the abduction should be blended between frontal and transverse plane. And there's so many abduction movements. There's side lying hip raises, extra range side lying hip raises. My favorite are glute medius hip thrusts and glute medius kickbacks. You can Google those, but basically, then the hip thrust variations should blend between, you could do double leg, you could do single leg and B stance, but mostly double leg, but vary them between barbell, Smith machine, and plate loaded devices. But also, you're getting plenty of work. In this system, you're getting plenty of stretch position work. So with the hip thrust, it doesn't always have to be emphasizing full range, or you can emphasize the lockout in a few different ways. We do a lot of pauses at the top. We do a lot of bar plus band, where you connect the bar to bands, makes the lockout even harder. And you can do pulses where you're just doing the top range of motion. If you only did hip thrusts and that was all you ever did, then you should probably do some bottom pauses, bottom range of motion, ways to make the bottom hard. But you get those when you do the lunges, the squats, the RDLs. And this is the best system I've come up with. It's the most scientific way to train the glutes, as we know right now. Any reasonable person would say that, because if you said to like a bro, okay, if you put 2 inches on your glutes in the next few months, you think they'd train it 1 day a week? No one would train it 1 day a week. You train it a few times a week. but you got to recover from it. And you can't get carried away. In fact, a lot of times when I train my girls, if I have them do reverse lunges off the Smith machine or the lever squat, the plate loaded squat, and they do 2 hard sets, I'm like, done. Sometimes 1 hard set, I'm like, just be done. You set a PR, I'm like, you're going to be sore from that. And sometimes they're like, Coach, I was so sore. Thank God I only did 1 hard set. That's something no one knows to do anymore. They always just do 3 to 4 sets.
Yeah.
Sometimes 1 and 2 sets is fine as well. You got to be able to recover. And if you don't recover, then what happens is, this happens in my gym a lot, typically on Fridays, and which sucks is because Friday, if you train Monday, Wednesday, Friday, you have an extra recovery day. So it'd be nice to be fresh on Friday, train hard because you got 2 days to recover. So optimally, that would be your day to push hard. But sometimes they're like, Coach, I pushed myself hard on Monday, Wednesday. I'm beat down. So what they do is they do a short muscle length day, or like that's when they film their influencer workouts, and they did.
Right.
I'm like, you didn't even do that workout, but that got the most likes. So they do variety. They do their foo-foo, wimpy movements that the men, arguably so, they get pissed at. That's when they do just some kickbacks, some abductions, some light
Bands
and stuff, and then they do that on Friday. They rest Saturday and Sunday and come back Monday and they crush it.
Yeah.
Because they did a wimpy workout. But that's auto-regulation. That's how they periodize. But ideally, they wouldn't have done too much on Monday and Wednesday to begin with, so that Friday they could have still crushed it. But that's an art unto its own, how to nail your training so that you don't have to deload so much and you don't have to do radical things. But that's something that takes a lot of years to master.
Today's episode is sponsored by AG1. AG1 is a vitamin mineral drink with probiotics, prebiotics, and adaptogens. Initially, I was extremely skeptical of AG1, as I am with all supplement companies, but after months of discussions with their lead nutrition scientist and the general team at AG1, I've been impressed by AG1's commitment to sourcing the highest quality ingredients and constantly updating their formulas to have the right ingredients in the optimal amounts. AG1 also rigorously tests their products to ensure that every single batch is free of banned substances, allergens, heavy metals, microbes, pesticides, herbicides, residual solvents, and mycotoxins. It's even earned the prestigious NSF Certified for Sport third-party testing approval stamp. Now, most people in the performance space talk a lot about macronutrients, like protein, carbohydrates, and fats. And these are obviously critically important. But so are the micronutrients like vitamins and minerals. And even if you're eating a healthy diet, it's often hard to get enough of these vitamins and minerals, along with the probiotics, prebiotics, and adaptogens to keep your body performing at its best. It's for these reasons, and many others, that I personally take AG1 almost every day. Now, it's of course not a replacement for eating whole, healthy foods, but it is a great way to make sure that you're plugging in any gaps in your nutrition to improve your energy, bolster your immune system, and just generally help promote a healthy gut microbiome and more. If you'd like to try AG1, you can go to drinkag1.com/perform to receive 5 free travel packs plus a year's supply of vitamin D3 plus K2. Again, that's drinkag1.com/perform to receive 5 free travel packs plus a year's supply of vitamin D3 plus K2. A couple of quick questions on that. You've made, I think, a couple of points really clear. To maximize glute development, whether that's growth, and specifically growth or strength, but growth is for the most part we're talking about. You haven't said these words directly, but it's clearly come through in all the examples and the information you provided. Consistency is incredibly important, right? And so all the rationale you're going back on here is we got to be able to do this more often so we can continue to progressively overload. And that's really been a backdrop here. So as somebody who's probably been responsible for more butt growth than anybody on the planet, I think that's a pretty powerful message from you that says, like, just do enough to stimulate growth here, but don't annihilate, so that you can keep training for months or years. And that's where you're going to see these big increases.
Yes.
You also used variation to get there. That is another way to keep yourself in the game, right? You can use, you call them short moment arms, right? These are, again, things with
short moment, short muscle length.
Short muscle length, right? Thank you. These are different exercises that you've said don't beat you up, right? And what that means is your joints and the tissue itself won't be as hurt or sore, but you'll still get a lot of results from them so that you can continue with your progressive overload and you can be consistent, right? One quick clarification on that little system, right? So you pick one exercise for the 4 different bucket areas, 3 days per week, and you said maximize variation. Am I picking, say, from bucket one exercise for Monday, one exercise that's a different one on Wednesday, and then a third different exercise on Friday? Or are you saying like every single workout, pick a totally different exercise per category?
That's such a good question. So ideally, what you would do is, okay, so this is the component of the system I didn't talk about, rotating focus. We've read about periodization our whole lives, right?
Yep.
And whenever you read about periodization, it's about changing volume and effort.
Yep.
Or like load and
intensity, some variation
intensity.
of it. Yep.
What does intensity mean? Load or effort? So I don't even say intensity anymore. But like, we basically, you start off with more volume, lighter loads, and do more sets, and then as you go up in weight and use more and more weight and train harder and harder and closer to failure, you do less. So volume, and so it makes an X. Volume and effort make an X. But it was always assumed to be like what I'm always going like, what exercises. The periodization is kind of like there aren't good books on it. If you want to read up on periodization, like I think my book Glute Lab is one of the best because I talked about all the nuances and stuff, but like they never talked about rotating the exercises. And I tell all these powerlifters, and I don't presume to know more than the bodybuilders about bodybuilding and the powerlifters about powerlifting. But I do think powerlifters could get stronger because guess what? Squats and deads compete with each other. You could say they build each other, but they compete. Everything competes up to like,
You generally don't see people that hold world records in both.
Yeah.
It's usually one or the other. They might have the total as well, but that's because they're ahead and one of them really fought.
So if you can't tell me that this lifter wouldn't have gotten better at squats if he quit focusing on deads for a while.
Right.
And vice versa.
You see the same thing in weightlifting, by the way, snatch and clean and jerk.
Yeah.
It's hard to be best at both.
Yeah.
One of them runs away than the other one, and you try to win that way, right?
So take some time. Like I did this just recently. I went, God, when have you ever prioritized your hamstrings for like 2 months? So I started every workout with either a deadlift, like a stiff leg deadlift or a good morning. And then I do 2 different isolation movements for the hamstrings. When have you ever done 3 hamstring movements in one workout? I started doing that. Oh my God, it got scary for a while. I'm doing good mornings with 345 pounds for 15 reps. I think I could have gotten 20, but I started rounding a lot. And I'm like, how far can I keep going here? But it's oh my God, I've never really prioritized. You're always doing squats first or deads, but never stiff leg. And you're never really doing as much hamstring work. So anyway, I'm going to tell how I think this applies to bodybuilding, but I'm going to tell you what I do in Booty by Bret. Booty by Bret, I was realizing, okay, and I got this, one time I had this epiphany. I'm like, someone asked me how many chin-ups I could do. Like, what's my max, weighted chin-up? And I'm like, well, I can do 12, but I could get more if I trained for it. Well, why don't I train for it? Well, what would I do if I trained for it? I'd probably do chin-ups every day. And then I started thinking about all the different lists. What if you wanted to get strongest at your bench press? What would you do? What if you wanted to get strongest at your squats? What would you do? How often would you squat? I'd probably squat twice a week, but I can't deadlift hard, not to failure twice a week. So I realized every lift has its own rules. And then I created StrongLifting. And those are the base. StrongLifting is like powerlifting, but with 6 lifts. Squats, bench, deads. So the 3 power lifts, and then chin-ups, military press, and hip thrusts. Those are my 6 favorite lifts. We got really good. In fact, I would say I'm the world's expert at getting you strong at all 6 lifts because that is all my girls did. What I will tell you is it's rare. Like, it's hard to have a 100-pound military press, strict.
Yeah.
But to have 135 is insane. That's like elite for a female. What I will tell you is if chin up, you take your body weight and you add the toes. You add to it because you're pulling your body weight up. Mm-hmm. So if you take your 6 lifts, your 1 rep max, and I'm talking strict, people will lie. Squatting below parallel, the powerlifting rules for the 3 power lifts, and then with a chin up, not starting from here, starting from a dead hang and touching your chest to the bar, not just getting your chin over chest to bar.
Yep.
Military, you can't use your legs; they're locked out. From here, overhead. and hip thrust full lockout, which people will just lie.
Yeah.
They'll add 100 pounds to their hip thrust because they'll get it 80% of the way up and call that a hip thrust.
Yeah.
It's very rare to get a 12 times body weight total. You get a 13 times body weight, there's only one person in that class so far. Yeah. And it's a cool thing because I think that's probably the best thing you can do for your physique is your relative total on those 6 lifts. And bodybuilders will say, who cares about when we're at max strength? Strength doesn't matter. It does matter for natural lifters. And yes, you can get a good physique from just doing lots of variety and mind-muscle connection and focusing on slower tempos. But in my opinion, that only gets you so far. You've got to get strong. My girls with the best glutes are very strong. Strong at hip thrusts, strong at squats, deadlifts. I mean, if I wanted my pecs to get bigger at age 48, after all these years of lifting, guess what? I better build my bench. I can't just get there doing all the flies and all the machines. Yes, you can theoretically increase volume, but there is, tension on the muscle is paramount. And so you gotta, and not 1 rep max, but whatever, your set of 6, your set of 10, something, you gotta be setting PRs and getting stronger. So anyway, what I will say is those power lifts, I started realizing, well, if you wanted to get your deadlift the strongest possible, quit prioritizing the squat. Don't go for PRs. Do squats still, but don't try to progressively overload
Save some gas.
Save the gas for the deadlifts.
Yeah.
So what I started doing with Booty by Bret is I had this rotating focus. It's a periodization method I came up with just for Booty by Bret. I wanted to publish it in the method just based on strength and conditioning journal because I think it's very innovative. So month 1, you prioritize is a well-rounded month, okay? That and we've changed it, but the original Booty by Bret periodization plan was month 1, it was a well-rounded month. Oh, in a well-rounded month, guess what you do? Monday, you squat, Wednesday, you hip thrust, and Friday, you deadlift. So that works out well because you're recovered for all of them.
Right.
Squat, hip thrust, deadlift. And then bench, chin up, military. And then if you do 3 full body days, you're going to do a compound upper body press, a compound upper body pull, a squat, a hinge, and a thrust. So 5 exercises per day for full body strength.
Yep.
And then the abduction for the upper and lower body, or you throw those in because of the psychological. Everyone wants the upper body abduction for the side delts, the lower body abduction for the upper glutes. Okay. So after this well-rounded month, now you've been pushing everything. Now it's time to specialize. Month 2 is a squat-focused month. So if you're trying to build your squat, all 3 full body days the first lift can be a squat pattern, but one of them will typically be, some people can handle squatting 3 days a week. Some people can't. Why risk it? People get FAI if they squat deep. People get knee pain, low back pain. So to have 2 squatting days, like Monday, Friday squatting, and Wednesday a single leg, a step up, a reverse lunge, a Bulgarian split squat, something like that. Okay, then what happens after the squat focused month? Your knees are going to be feeling it a little bit. So it's a perfect time to transition to the hip thrust. Okay, so now you focus on the hip thrust for a month. Every day starts out with the hip thrust variation. Typically it's barbell hip thrust on Monday, straight sets, pause reps on Wednesday, bar plus band on Friday.
Yep.
Or pulses or something, or 1 1/4 reps. But 2 of the 3 are more focused on lockout work.
Yep.
Now, each one of these months, you're gonna squat, hinge, and thrust every month. That just one is on the focus, the others are on the back burner. Okay, and then what happens at the end of the hip thrust month? You're feeling good again.
Yep.
All right, now it's time for a deadlift month. And then deadlifts, you can't deadlift. Well, you can deadlift 3 times a week if you do like stiff legs, single leg RDL and RDL.
Yeah.
But actual full deadlifts like a sumo or conventional or even a trap bar or semi-sumo, no. But if you do that, have one day, typically like say day 1, Monday might be stiff leg or RDL real strict, light, and stay a couple reps shy of failure. Wednesday could be a hinge still, but it's a single leg hinge. And then Friday is your heavy deadlift day because you got 2 days to recover. Yeah. So now after the 4 weeks of heavy deadlifting, guess what? Your low back is taking a beating, your overall system. Now it's perfect time for a single leg month, single leg and dumbbell month. And that's what I
So
love
by
about that.
definition, you're taking intensity out. You're still going to get burns and you're going to feel good, but you're taking intensity out because you cut load down because you're on a single leg, period.
And 2 studies have shown, one with step-ups, one with Bulgarians, showed they built squat strength just as well as the bilateral lift.
Yeah.
So you're still keeping your strength up.
At minimum, you're going to maintain where you're at. You're not going to go backwards.
You're going to maintain. You can even build. So it's kind of cool because some people are like, I grow my glutes during the hip thrust month. I grow my glutes best during the single leg month. I grow my glutes best during the squat month. Maybe squats are good for them, or maybe it's because during the squat month, hip thrusts are third, and you're doing them with a mind-muscle connection. Who knows? There's so many moving parts, but it's more fun training this way. So that's how I did Booty by Bret. Then I started talking about, what about bodybuilders? If we've been talking about this, what if you said, Bret, can you grow your delts? I just did it this year. When lengthened partials became popular, I'm like, I'm so sick of doing dumbbell lateral raises.
Yep.
I'm even sick of cable lateral. I want to see if I can grow doing lengthened partials and doing basically more variety.
Yep.
So I started training delts 3 times a week. And they got bigger than they've ever been, I think. And so some days I'm doing heavy dumbbells, sometimes sometimes cable, but a lot of times just doing the bottom partial. And then I got really scientific, like, how do you maximally stretch this? You really should have the cable facing kind of this way and just go to here. And with a dumbbell, I don't want to do side lying, but basically, I don't want to go all the way up because after here, there's no tension, but I would just lay on my side and just do halfway up.
Yep.
Lengthened partials. And just from the greater volume, I grew my delts. You guess what? You get so sick of delt day.
Yeah.
You get so sick of training your delts.
Yeah.
So do it for a month. But what if we did that? Because maintenance is easy. So I made a video, and I don't even know if I ever posted it because it was the sexual innuendos, but I'm like, imagine having 6 balls. And this is what progressive overload is. But not just 6, I'm saying 6 balls because each ball represents my favorite lift.
Yep.
My 6 favorite for full body strength and musculature and even
the 6
function,
you've listed earlier. Yep.
The 6 I listed earlier. So imagine trying to juggle 6 balls. It's really hard. But what if every time you gain strength, you set a PR, the ball grew a little bit. So every time you set a PR, the ball gets bigger. It gets to a point where you can't juggle all 6 of them. They're knocking into each other, they interfere with each other, and you try to go up on 6 lifts every month of your life, you will get nowhere.
No.
The balls will all fall to the ground and you stagnate, you get nowhere. But what if you have 6 balls laid out and you take 2 of them and you're like, okay, and they get bigger, it's okay. It's easy to juggle 2 balls. And these 4 are on maintenance mode.
Yep.
Guess what the literature shows? It's very easy to maintain size and strength with minimal volume. So these 4
one time a week.
Yeah.
Like 1 time a week, a very minimal.
Few sets, one time a week, or even
every other week. Yeah.
So you can maintain your strength and your size with lower volume. So I started thinking maybe we're doing it wrong. Maybe the bodybuilders could have seen better results had they switched the focus from month to month. So 1 month you're doing
body part.
So I thought about it, 1 for upper, 1 for lower, because what bodybuilder has ever had prioritized glutes and adductors go together? Because when you go deep, the adductors and deep hip flexion actually have better leverage. So it's really, really hard to do deep stuff and not work your adductors because they have such good leverage and hip extension.
Adductors, by the way, are the opposite. What we're clearly saying here is ADD, adductors versus abductors. So if the abductors, ABD, were the jumping jacks, adductors are the ones that you're pulling your leg close, right, together. So
adductors add to the body, abductors take away.
Right. So what you're saying is
adductor magnus is a huge hip extensor down deep.
Right.
Deep hip flexion. So
your groin muscle. So if you are squatting, say, for example, and you're doing a lot of squatting type of activities, and say you only go a quarter of the way down or halfway down, and then you change it and you go really far down, you're very likely to notice really sore adductors. Yeah. Right? Your groins, and this is exactly what you're talking about, because in that position, they start actually adding to hip extension. Yeah. Where in the top position, they don't actually do that.
They have the best leverage in deep hip, slightly better than the glutes.
Yep.
on average.
Which is why, again, you can train your groin area, if you want to think about it that way, by doing full range of motion all the way to the bottom squats.
Yeah.
If everything else works and you don't have other issues with it, you see tremendous growth there.
So you pair adductors and glutes together.
Yep.
So 1 month for the lower body, you're focusing on glutes and adductors. 1 month you're focusing on quads, and 1 month hamstrings. Then the other stuff goes on the back burner. And then for upper body, it's hard to do all of them because arms. So I said 1 month focus on pecs, 1 month on the back, and 1 month on the delts. What about arms? Okay, well then you have 4 months, and then I think 3 months of then you're back. Greedy. 3 months, then you're back. So I thought about a really effective system. I was gonna start like Body by Bret to be for guys, but I don't know. I don't know if I could. I'm busy with Buddha, but it's hard. Anyway, I thought that would be a fun system, and then I thought, well, instead of having every person has their system and they have all these theories, it would be, how would you test that? Well, you'd have to do a few cycles of it. So it'd have to be a 9-month study. You can have the control group do just regular body part split training.
Mm-hmm.
And then this new method where basically the muscle you're prioritizing, you're training it 3 times a week.
Yep.
It's hard to train chest 3 days a week, quads 3 days a week. It can be done, but that's the primary focus. That, and then you have an upper body muscle, and then everything else goes on the back burner, goes on maintenance mode. Would you see better hypertrophy results, blasting and cruising? I don't know. It's just a theory, but it's a strong theory. A strong argument could be made.
Yep. I want to go back one thing to make sure we finish the loop on this one. You mentioned, what did you call it? The rule of 3 or something like that? What was the rule of thirds exactly again? What was that?
A third of your exercises should be vertical in nature, vertical hip extension. 1/3 should be horizontal, and then 1/3 should be lateral rotary.
All right, perfect. Okay, great. Thank you for
that.
When
you do that, interesting, when you do that, it's not just best for the glutes. You also, because the vertical exercises are going to hit the quads and the hammies, the horizontal will get some hammies too. And, so it's like you're going to get or that system I talked about where you pick a squat lunge, pick a hinge, pick a thrust bridge, pick an abduction. The squat lunge movements develop the quads and adductors. The hinge movements develop the hammies. And then so you get nice develop. It's a good system to use
for overall development. If you want to develop all the lower body of those things. Okay. In your, whatever it is now, 20 plus years of focusing on the hip thrust and the glutes and the hip extensions and all things kind of in this area, I'm sure you've interacted and had plenty of people, women or not, come up to you and say, I've tried to grow my glutes. I've tried, it's not worked. Are there any themes that have popped up over those years and those interactions of kind of most common mistakes that they've been making? In other words, people have been like, I've been at this for a year. It's not working. What am I doing wrong, Bret?
Yes, great question. Because those types come to me and they can get results. It's really hard for some people to get stronger. So when I talked about the environment in Glute Lab, you show up to Glute Lab, you're proud of because you're the strongest person in your gym because you hip thrust 3 plates per side. And then you come in and you see, in Florida, you see Dre, you see Vika, you see Diane, you see Masa, you see all these girls doing 5 plates per side. And you're like, oh my God. And not sloppy reps. That's the thing about, I said 315 for 20, not sloppy reps. You control it. Full, little slight pause at the top, all the way down, all the way up. Rep 20 looks a lot like rep 1. It's not like arching and not hyperextending your spine and anterior tilting and only getting 80% of the way up and jerking the way. It's a smooth tempo through a full range of motion. That is a great indicator of someone who's going to have amazing glute development. But I would say most people just can't get strong without a trainer. And I will tell you what fuels me, because I travel between Fort Lauderdale, Las Vegas, and San Diego. I was just in San Diego right before this. And they call it the Bret effect. They say they independently came up with it in Fort Lauderdale and in San Diego. And they just think, Bret, I don't know what it is. I've been hearing this for 20 years, 28 years. I can lift so much more when you're around. I don't know what it is. And I joke that it's my pheromones.
Oh, absolutely.
But it's having someone who trusts you, hey, I want you. This happened the other day. Lily, she's like warming up. Hasn't ever deadlifted above 365 in training. She hit 405 at a competition. Then she had a back injury, and she's been anyway. So I just when you've coached for so long, you know so much just based off bar speed. I don't know what the bar speed actually is. I'm just watching. You know what it looks like. So you have these indicators. When I could watch my client Allegro, when I can watch Lily, and I watch her go 275 and it goes boop, and she's just accelerated on the way up. You can tell when it looks like, I go, you could have done that for 37 reps. I could go 315. She goes boop. I go, you could have done that for 37 reps. Okay, I don't know why I said 37, but I go, she goes, what do I do next? I go 385. She's like, what? Go 385. She's like, don't warm up in between. I go, what do you want to do? She goes, I want to do whatever you tell me. I go, then do 385. And then I announce it. I'm like, everyone, Lily's going for 385. And then everyone's watching. And then, and I always tell them with sumo, watch Steffi Cohen. The bar doesn't fly up.
Yep.
It doesn't rip off the ground like conventional. Take your time. Could take 4 seconds for the plates, but you got to maintain good posture. You panic and you round and you shoot the hips up, and now the lockout on sumo becomes so infinitely harder. Mm-hmm. So she pulls it, she hits 385, puts down. She's so happy. This has happened for so many years that it fuels me. I love it too, because when I'm not around, I travel back and forth. When I'm not around, they don't go for PRs. When I am around, they're like, yay, we can PR again. And it probably works out in my favor because you don't want to crush them every week.
Right.
So it's great. So you train at my gym just because everyone's so strong. Yeah, like if you and I trained at some gym where everyone's doing muscle ups and 20, like we'd be like, shit, I better do, you can probably do a muscle up. I can't. But anyway, never tried. If everyone were doing 20 pistol squats and I'm like, I can barely do a pistol squat. I better get my act. If everyone were doing Nordic ham curls, going up and down, and every person could do bodyweight Nordics for 5 reps, and we'd be like, I can't even do one. We'd be secretly doing Nordics. So a lot of it's to do with your environment. Yep. So these girls can't get strong on their own. They just don't know what they're doing. Even you can tell them. That's why trainers have a job. Yep. That's why, as of now, personal trainers have job security, because it's so hard to do on your own. Something's wrong. A lot of times it's the effort they're putting forth. They think they're training hard, but they could really do 5 more reps if they really wanted to at the end of the set. A lot of times they're sabotaging themselves because, God, trainers around the world, when they hear this, are going to be nodding their head. Men and women both do this. They do it differently. Women will want to combine. And this will piss women off if they hear this clip, but they want to combine weights with yoga, Pilates, spin, everything else. And they'll say, well, why? Oh, your heart isn't important, your heart health. Oh, it's not important to be flexible. Yes, but you have to prioritize. So if you want hypertrophy and you want glutes to grow and you're doing all this extra exercise and you're not really training when recovered and you're so busy trying to fit in all your stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
Different
6 balls in there. You gotta train at the right time. I like to think about it. If I said you gotta give yourself every opportunity to PR, what are you gonna do? You're gonna make sure you got a good night of sleep. You're not gonna go do an hour of cardio before you go try and do that lift, try to hit a bench PR. You're gonna eat the right amount, just the right amount, the right foods that agree with you before your workout, the right time. Some people like to eat an hour before. Some people like to train fasted. But like you're gonna show up feeling good. You had your pre-workout a half an hour before, your coffee or whatever gives you the best chance. And that's what you got to do day in and day out for lots of years. And what I see is when you're just squeezing in your workout at the end of the day, when you're already stressed and and then you're just going through the motions. Yep. You're not going to grow like maximally. You might see some results, and then too much variety, too much program hopping, trying to do every exercise. I love all the exercises. Trust me. In my gym, I love quads and hammies too. So it's hard because in my gym, I've got hack squat machine, the pendulum squat machine. leg presses, Smith the machine, the V squat. Like, I've got it all. What do I do? I want to hit quads. Sometimes you're like, I've been so distracted. I haven't done squats in a while. And you're going, okay, I got to get back to squats. Oh, I also have belt squats. I have and yeah, they're all amazing. And they transfer to each other, which is cool. But sometimes you take your focus away. Same thing with hamstrings. I've got every leg curl machine. I've got plate loaded 45-degree hyper, selectorized 45-degree hyper now. You don't even have to grab a dumbbell. You just hold on to something and pull. The reverse hyper, I've got plate loaded deadlift apparatuses, the hammer strength. I've got the pit shark. We do stiff legs off that. And all these gizmos too, like our T-bell and on the blocks, our sliding leg curl, the rolling, the hammy track and roller, and all these cool things. And you can be distracted because it's like, you want your hamstrings to grow, try and get really strong at stiff legs, or and then a leg or seated leg curls or something like. So trust me, I get it, but they're doing too much variety. They're not prioritizing progressive overload and PRs and doing all the things necessary to give themselves the best chance of PRing, like adequate sleep, adequate protein, adequate or optimal calories, etc. Sometimes you'll go to women and kind of try to gauge how much protein they're taking in. Sometimes it's like they're eating 50 grams of protein in a day and they weigh 120, and they see great results when you take that to 90, 100, 110, 120, 130. They see better results that way. Like, some people, it's like magic. So yeah, got to get, so inadequate protein, inadequate sleep and stress levels, program hopping, but the most is lack of effort. And trying to compensate with effort, with volume and variety, and it doesn't compensate for it. You can't just do all the exercise, and doing 20 sets with 5 reps in the tank probably doesn't beat doing one awesome set to true failure and writing it down in your logbook or on your app or in your notes on your phone and then trying to beat it, because that requires a mental challenge too. When you've hip thrusted 315 for 15 and you're trying to get 20, and you're like, how the hell am I going to get 16 and 7? How am I going to get to 20? And then you're hip thrusting tomorrow, you're going to be like, okay, I better eat optimally today. I better sleep optimally today. And what time am I going to train tomorrow? I'm going for 16. This is going to be tough. It's hard to do. And it doesn't always work linearly like that. That's another complication. So that's why you have variety, because you can't just go, I got 15, 16, then 17, then 18, then 19, then 20. Usually you get 15 and then you take a big break and you do all the things, and then all of a sudden you gear up for 20 again and it happens. But that's another story.
Today's episode is sponsored by David. David makes protein bars unlike any I have ever encountered. They have an amazing 28 grams of protein, only 150 calories, and 0 grams of sugar. That's right, 28 grams of protein, and 75% of its calories come from that protein. This is 50% higher than the next closest protein bar. Honestly, it's the best tasting protein bar I've had by a mile. While I often talk about the importance of getting 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight for things like muscle health and recovery and the promotion of lean body mass and satiety, the reality is that for most people, getting that 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight is really challenging. However, David makes that easy. Their bars taste incredible and are each packed with 28 grams of protein. I eat one almost every day and always have 2 or 3 in my backpack when I'm traveling. Like, literally always. Initially, I was all about the blueberry flavored one, but these new peanut butter flavors are just a cheat code of yummy. It probably sounds funny, but I eat them as dessert all the time. When you try them, you'll know exactly what I mean. The macronutrients, one more time, are 28 grams of protein, 150 calories, and 0 grams of sugar. If you're interested in trying these bars for yourself, you can go to davidprotein.com/perform. Again, that's davidprotein.com/perform. So certainly there's issues with effort, right? I would imagine that many people are trying really hard, but their efforts are misplaced. This is the example of doing too many different things. So lifting, maybe not lifting frequently enough, maybe not waiting long enough. It's only been a month, right? You need probably several months, or you're adding in different forms of exercise and things like that. So you're trying really hard, your effort is super high, but there's not enough focus on stimuli to drive that adaptation. There's too much distraction in the training, right? Another distraction you mentioned was changing your programs too often, right? So again, this is where effort could be high. You could be really getting a burn and really getting tired after the workout, but you did 50 different exercises or, you changed them. And because of that, you probably potentially did some maybe lower, less effective exercises. So your selection wasn't great. You were doing maybe all body weight or all light bands. And what you're saying is you might be better off picking one set of one exercise, going pretty heavy, and then just getting out of there, right?
That would actually be a fun, that would be hilarious to do like a training study where you just have them pick one set to go to third, and then you can do 15 sets, but we're not going to track it. Just do the mind-muscle connection with those.
Yep.
Feel
Squeeze hard as you can.
Yeah,
who cares,
feel the
right?
squeeze, feel the glutes moving the weight. But that would be a good system because it's hard when you say progressive overload. It's hard to pin that down for people. Does that mean do you go up on all 4 sets?
Yep.
How do you go up?
Another thing that came to my mind here, I don't know how much you've experienced this or not, in terms of, again, let's think with the same of I've tried to grow my glutes. By the way, I should interject here. We've been talking way more about the glutes than I thought we were going to today, but you could change out glute for anything else. It doesn't actually matter. Some of the details here do matter, the specific studies and the research, and I'm going to ask here in a second about how the glutes are different from other muscles. But I hope what you're gleaning from this is not just only if you're sitting here thinking, I don't care that much about glutes or whatever. This is scientific principles. This is how do you answer research questions. This is specific and precision, right? So you're talking about not all exercises are the same. Not all muscle groups are the same. We've dug in on the glutes. So again, the answers might be different, but this is exactly how you should go about answering it if you care more about the triceps or the quads or the calves or anything else. So this is a system that you developed over, again, almost 30 years now that can be applied to anything else. So I really hope that people listening are gleaning this out of it and going, okay, maybe you don't have some variation of love for the glute, but this is really the nuance that goes into getting better results for a very specific question that you've really formulated a career out of. So hope that message is coming through. Now, that said, the question on this last particular topic is, again, I'm training hard. I'm trying to grow my glutes, but mine aren't growing. I'm eating protein. I'm doing all those other things off the field. It's not hormones. Like, how does one at home, whether they're a trainer, a coach, or the actual person, how do you go about figuring out which of these variations work based on your body type? And what are the things that I should be thinking about and paying attention to before I then throw an exercise out? And I can say things like, okay, great. A new study came out. It did show that let's just say a goblet squat is not as effective for growing the glutes as a barbell high bar back squat is, but I did the high bar back squat for 6 months and I got nowhere. Like, how do I go about that system of figuring out what works for my mechanics and my physiology?
That's such a great question. I know I used to do EMG on all my clients.
And just to clarify, you said this in multiple. EMG is where we can go in and directly measure the muscle activation. So electrical signals for muscle activation. Yep. So go back, as you've heard Bret say that a bunch of times. What he's saying is direct measure of muscle activation.
Yep.
But continue on.
Now, the problem with EMG for estimating hypertrophy, it does a good job of measuring activation, the neural portion of it, the active portion, but not the passive portion, the stretch. And
which is another way of saying just because a muscle is activated, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to grow.
Yeah.
There's some crossover there, clearly.
Well, think about this, because I feel like the long length got carried away for a while, and it was all about stretching and long length. That's been the trend. And 2024 was all about, there was the year of longer muscle lengths.
Yep. Train over a full range of motion versus a
pendulum can swing too far. Think about this. There are numerous studies that show you can stretch a muscle and it will grow.
Pure stretch.
Pure stretch. Now, when you stretch a muscle, yes, you probably get a little bit of activation just from like protection and guarding, but like it's mostly all just passive.
Yep.
You're just stretching it. You're not activating it. And it grows through purely passive mechanisms. You can also just slap electrodes on and activate a muscle without stretching it, and it grows. EMS, and that's something that I was skeptical about years ago. And now have you looked at the research on this over the years?
I have a Catalyst suit. It's awesome.
Yeah, so
It's fantastic.
It grows muscle.
Yeah.
Just activating the muscles through muscle stimulation. Now, if you're doing a program like Booty by Bret, where you're covering all your bases, should you do EMS on the side? Should you be stretching a muscle? Can all muscles grow through stretch? What if I wanted to stretch my delts? What do I do? I can't. I'm blocked. You could stretch your rec fem, but can you stretch your vasties enough?
No.
So when people talk about stretch, I'm like, okay, hammies, yes. Pecs, yes. Calves, yes.
Yeah.
Not every muscle I think could benefit. And then, but like with that system I told you about earlier, putting muscles on the back burner, if you did the rotating focus, that would be a good time to say, all right, I'm going to slap electrodes on the other muscles that I'm not prioritizing.
Oh, there you go. Keep the maintenance mode, right?
And help add to the stimulus, because there's a lot of research showing that EMS grows muscles.
The first time I did the Catalyst suit, I got so sore. Now, part of it was because I pegged it. Like I just went literally to the end of the contraction capacity and did like a 30-minute thing on it and got so brutally sore.
That's where it's activating on the way, and you're moving
you
against
stand
it.
there, right? I'm like standing there basically wearing a full body,
Yeah.
a TENS unit basically, right? So it's over there. And it's like everything is squeezing. And I just like went to the wire and I'm like, squeeze as hard as you can for 20 minutes. And turns out that's a lot of muscle contraction.
Yeah.
And I got sore, everything.
Yeah. So
user error on that. Well, it wasn't user error. I knew what I was getting into.
So that's muscle growth through activation and no stretching, no passive. So
none. Yeah.
Clearly there are multiple that to me shows that there has to be multiple mechanisms leading to Rome, leading to muscle growth. So there has to be a mechanism that's more passive and a mechanism that's more active, because they're separate stimuli. So this is an awesome question. I will just mention briefly that I measured muscle activation back in the day with all my clients. And I learned so much with different people. Like I had this client, Sammy. She could do squats with 285 pounds, back squats. But if she did a goblet squat with 50 and 70 pounds, she got more glute activation. You're moving through the same range of motion though. So how could that not
glute
matter?
activation with 20% of the weight.
Something with her about having the load. So then same with a deadlift. If she had a barbell, she could do 225 pound, or I think it might have went up to 315. And then she did 106 pound kettlebell and a 203 pound kettlebell. And something about having the load centered more, she just activated her glutes a lot higher. Not everyone is like that, but she was like that.
You're directly measuring her muscle, her glute activation.
Glute activation in different areas.
And it was the same with a 50-pound goblet squat
50-pound goblet.
Which traditionally should activate the glutes less, right? Because it's a front load and quad dominant and all that.
Well, something about
doesn't.
Load being centered makes it, I think when you have kind of like lanky and you're folding and you don't have the best squat form, you're battling butt wink, you're battling keep a neutral spine, you might have things shutting off and stuff. We can't always assume. Anyway, I had this girl, Erin, at the same time, and she started doing all this. I put bands, or I had her do band seated hip abduction, and I'm like, okay, this is activating all the areas, even leaning forward, even getting your lower glute max. You're getting as high of activation doing these higher than doing 1 rep max squats. Well, how many 1 rep max squats can you do per week versus band seated hip abduction? So I showed her the results. Like I said, you're getting higher band activation, like higher activation on bands than anyone I've ever seen. I think you should do bands every day. A lot of band work every day. So she got carried away. I eventually starts bringing 20 different bands to the gym. I made a post on the crazy band lady, but her glutes grew a ton. So when you have these individualized prescriptions, I think you can see better results. But basically, I don't have a system for that. The only thing I would try is a long length focus twice a week. Yeah. So I'd say, look, you've been doing something like Booty by Bret. Let's switch to 2 days and let's focus on glute dominant squats, low bar box squats, sitting way back to parallel, vertical shin. the shin doesn't have to be vertical, but it's as vertical as possible while still feeling right. And then glute dominant step ups, Bulgarians, lunges, meaning like not a knee dominant, not an upright, letting your knee go way forward, keeping the shin pretty vertical, leaning, and then RDLs. And let's do those. Good mornings, RDLs. Let's do these exercises for a while, but hit them hard, but just twice a week. See if you grow better from that. You're going to know within a couple of months. And then if that doesn't work, let's try a short length focus. Let's do 4 or 5 days a week. We're only doing hip thrusts and bands. I did this with my client, Beth. Beth did powerlifting, but she had a coach that was all about the power lifts. And I said, have you ever focused on hip thrusts? No, my coach hates them. Have you ever done band work? No, he thinks those are wimpy too. All right, just do hip thrusts and band work for like 6 months and do them as frequently and as much as you can. See how that works. And her butt blew up. Blew up. So when all these people are like, she was strong at squats and deadlifts, they weren't working for her. And so you'll hear so many anecdotes, and these scientific people, I could call them all out right now. These scientific people, and they don't care about anecdotes. And and to me, they're not scientific. Because you can say, look at this person. They will just shut it out. They'll go, well, that doesn't mean anything. What if she wasn't doing squat? Okay, I'll show you a video of her squats and deadlifts. She had good form. What do you say then? Like, they just don't want to reconcile the two. So they want to stick to one rigid method, and you got to be flexible if you want to be a good personal trainer. So that method worked better for her. So I would do the two extremes: 2 days a week of long length glute work versus like 5 days a week of shortened position glute work. It could be a genetic reason or just anatomy. You tolerate these, because if you don't tolerate an exercise well and it gives you pain or fear, inhibition, you're not going to maximally activate your glutes. So anyway, maybe there are frequency versus like so some people respond better to frequency. Some people who, even your anatomy. What if your moment arms are terrible in the stretch for glutes and really ideal? And I also think you can change through training. When you do concentrics or shorter lengths, you will lose sarcomeres in series. When you do eccentrics or longer lengths, you will add sarcomeres in series. So maybe you can change the way and that might affect neural activation too. The muscle says, we've caused this muscle to be more effective at longer lengths or more effective at shorter lengths. And there could be, we just don't know enough right now. And that's what always frustrates me about social media right now. It's rewarded these bold claims, camps where you're very strong, like this is the method, this is what yields the best muscle growth. It doesn't reward uncertainty. It doesn't reward scientific claims or cautious claims.
Evidence-based as well.
I get mad because I'm like, if I don't know the answer to this, like, then you don't know the answer to this, because no one does researches this stuff as much as me. And I see these people making these bold claims, like, we don't have the evidence for that yet. We don't know enough. There's so many studies, deep squats versus parallel squats, sumo versus conventional. There's not one training study on sumo versus conventional. Hip thrust, should you do full range? Should you do partial? Should you use bands? Should you, we need like 30 glute studies to be able to speak confidently about what works best. Until then, it's theoretical, and we should be cautious about what we think we know.
What do you think about a system I just sort of jotted down based on what you're saying? Checkpoint number 1, if you're trying to grow your glutes and whatever exercise you're doing, whatever your program design is, it's resulting in pain, not muscle soreness, but pain. Your back is going to hurt, your knees hurt, right? Then pretty obviously stop that. Don't do that, right? So the checkpoint you could run through in your head is if in your program you're then getting injured, whether we mean like a true injury or it's just simply the kind of pain you don't want, then we need to change your program. That seems to be like a pretty intuitive first start. So don't
always.
Why? You don't need to be in pain. And then 2, this would be the consistency play. We're going to lose training volume over time. After that, and this is where like I just sort of made this up. The second thing I would think about in my head is the actual exercise feeling like it's working? How much credit do you give or not? Should people feel their glutes working in the workout? I'm sure it doesn't have to be 10 out of 10, but if I'm doing hip thrusts and I don't feel my glutes getting a pump, if I don't feel them getting tired. Should I be concerned that that's not working for me, or am I okay there?
So let me play devil's advocate and then tell you what I really think. We looked at that in the Plotkin study, 2023. Daniel Plotkin, the researcher, asked everyone, which exercise do you feel your glutes more in? Hip thrusts or squats? All 20-some subjects said hip thrusts, and they grew the glutes the same. They were
maybe
equal.
That's not a good one.
Well, but I do think it is, because yeah, if you don't feel your glutes much in hip thrusts, it's probably not the best exercise for you, or you should find a way of carrying it out, or like maybe you like the Smith machine more. Maybe you feel
What
it more.
position?
Yeah,
You're feeling it too much in your quads, your hamstrings.
How could that not help?
Yeah,
That's always been a thing since the dawn of bodybuilding. Try to feel it, and every person figures out a way to feel it more. That has to help.
Yep.
But it's also, when I was getting the advantage of being a bro, we wanted to get strong. When we're in college and we're like, everyone's stronger than you, you're like wanting to get stronger. We weren't focused on feeling my delts during a military press. You know what I mean?
No.
I just wanted a stronger shoulder press.
Yeah.
And guess what? You get really strong with pretty good form and everything develops. And that's the argument I hear, both sides of the argument. The people will say, oh, tell me how you do a squat without activating your glutes. But come on. When you're walking upstairs, be super upright and you'll feel your quads more. And then lean in and let the hips come up a little more, and you'll feel so much more glute walking upstairs. You can't tell me technique doesn't matter.
No, it does. I mean, we saw that in our trap bar versus conventional deadlift study, right? So the aggregate results are different than the individual results.
Yes.
Because some people, when they did a trap bar deadlift, actually kept the exact same position that they did in their conventional deadlift. Others went super vertical. It was basically like a leg press. They're standing straight up.
Yep.
Where their deadlift, they were much more. So guess what happened with EMG activity? On average, no group difference, because it washed out.
Yeah.
Right? But the individual person, depending on their arm length primarily, right, that allowed them to stay in the same position or not, it completely changed. So for some of our participants in that study, the trap bar deadlift was way more quad activation. But for others, it literally changed nothing whatsoever between conventional and trap bar.
Brad Schoenfeld and I did a rear delt study. I think it was the first EMG study he did. He just got his Neuraxin unit.
Yeah.
And we wanted to see what's better, neutral or pronated grip. Because back then, everyone said if it's not pronated, it won't grow your rear delts.
Oh, yeah.
Well, neutral grip, on average, outperformed it, but there were huge inter-individual differences. Some people getting way higher one way versus the other. So go with what you feel the most. Because if you're moving a muscle through the same range of motion and getting similar stretch, then the technique that activates it the most, in my opinion, but sometimes that technique can influence the stretch.
Yep.
So under the same, all right, if passive tension is equal, then the higher active tension wins out.
Yep.
But you can't have a technique that increases active
tension kills all passive
while decreasing passive. And I think that's the argument for sumo deads. Well, it gets you less stretch, but it gets you more activation in a lot of clients. A lot of studies, there's only one study by Escamilla looking at EMG with sumo versus conventional, and they showed similar activation in the glutes, but there's probably 12 studies at this point on squats and other exercises. And sumo, in general, you get greater glute activation, but you're going to get lesser glute stretch. So there needs to be a training study.
Yep.
And then we need to see for ourselves. But right now, people should just be cautious. They should say, I prefer conventional because you get a little bit better stretch. Maybe, but don't be like sumo is all adductor and zero gluteus maximus. Sumo's got to be the dumbest thing ever, because then you get all the TikTokers and they repeat your stuff, and then it becomes fact before we've ever even looked into it. Yeah.
So, okay, back to my list here of kind of 5 things. Number 1, start off, don't get in pain. 2, hopefully you feel something either in the muscle you're trying to train that day, or potentially some amount of soreness the next day.
Yes.
Obviously, we know that more sore is not better.
Feeling it, getting a pump, getting sore, these are indicators that you worked the muscle, though.
Seems reasonable.
Yeah.
If you're not in pain, you're feeling it, even getting a huge pump on the day, and you're still not growing, then potentially think about going heavy. A general problem people have had, you've sort of mentioned this earlier, is they don't realize that, hey, 3 sets of 50 with the band, like that may not be the jam to grow every muscle, right? You
really
may have to go
focus on
heavy.
progressive overload. Yeah.
Progressive overload, right? My gut is most people will be done by this one in terms of you're going to start growing at this point. But let's say I got that box
Then
checked.
focus on mind muscle.
Now focus on potentially frequency. Right? So now I'm not in pain. My glutes are getting pumped. I'm going really heavy. I'm at 315, whatever the numbers are. Now maybe think about adding in that extra day. Volume, frequency, you could kind of play one game here, right?
Sure.
So those would be kind of like 4 and 5, volume or frequency. So maybe you need to add another day with those less damaging ones. So this is where more bands could come in.
Yep.
It's just a way of getting you more volume.
Sure.
But how does that kind of like 5-step checklist progression sound for somebody struggling? A reasonable approach there? Is there anything else you would add to that?
I would say have one in there where you really focus on mind muscle connection activation.
Yep.
Somewhere in there saying, what if, because there's evidence that it makes brain changes in the cortical, the motor cortex. There's at least one, maybe two. I think there's a recent one too, showing that you get actual changes in the brain responsible for activating that muscle. So maybe if you have a little month where you focus on mind muscle connection, not even going to fit, but squeezing the shit out of the muscle and really trying to target in your brain. In that study, they used bands and it was isometrics because they thought isometrics would build greater brain changes because you're focusing harder.
Yep.
And that might make a difference.
Yeah, interesting. Okay. So making sure that, again, if those progression strategies aren't working, that you're just trying to be more connected directly to the muscle.
Build those connections more.
Right, and getting more out of it. Makes a ton of sense. We've gone on quite a journey thus far. I got a couple things. If you've still got some energy left.
I could go for hours.
I know. I know you can. To finish up on. So one of them is, the very first question I asked you is, how do you think about training men versus women? And you laid out a lot of stuff to think about. I just want to double tap on them if I can. One, relating to recovery. And so I'll ask this from the scientific perspective, as well as, and potentially even more important, your years of experience. So what do we understand about men versus women in the context of strength training here regarding things like recovery? Have you truly seen that women recover more than men in general? Do they need more volume? Those are kind of two separate questions. And then a third one I'll smuggle in here is, are there any other things physiologically like menstrual cycle phase or things like that you have found to either be big considerations or things you put a lot of effort into and then panned out to not really matter too much?
Awesome. Yes, and yes. So, but also it could be that the women are on a permanent specialization program. Glutes. Booty by Bret is a glute specialization plan.
It's not a glute only, but it's a specialization.
It's full body with we hit quads, adductors, and hammies, but we don't do a ton of leg extensions, seated hip adductions, or leg curls, because that would just take away from what you could potentially recover from with the glutes. You can't just hit every muscle. What if you trained every muscle like you did with Booty by Bret? Where you did 36 to 45 sets a week of glutes, with quads, with hammies, with adductors, calves. It's too much. You could never recover. So I just think they can recover better because they're on a glute specialization plan, because they have reduced volume of the upper body muscles and even the quads and hammies.
And you've intentionally, as you said earlier, built in a day that is a more recoverable day. Yeah. Right? So the exercise selection by default is easier to recover from. Makes sense.
Yeah. So, but I don't think it's just that. Early on in my training career, I'm like, man, these women can do these workouts. I tried to do one once, 2007. Tried to do what I give my girls. I was on the ground, laying there for half an hour. I was like, is it possible to have a heart attack at
28?
It goes 30, 31 or 2 or something. I'm like, and I remember just sitting there like, wow, that made me gain respect for what I put them through. So it could be the influence of hormones and estrogen, and they have bigger type 1 fiber hypertrophy. They have higher estrogen. Maybe that leads to better muscle damage repair. If you put a guy through the workouts they do, it kills him. But the girls can bounce back quicker. I know there was a study I read back in the day on bench press. Guys, it would take them 2 or 3 days to get back. Like say they did a 1 rep max, or took them 2 days to repeat that. The women could repeat that the next day. And you could say, well, that's because they're not as strong relatively. But with women, they are as strong with a lot of these glute exercises as men, relatively. Right. They're stronger. Relatively, women are stronger at hip thrust than men. And you could say,
absolutely, in some cases,
almost absolutely as well. And you could say, well, that's just because they do it a lot too. But I think there might be something with the anatomy. But anyway, I think they can do more volume. I think they can recover slightly quicker, so their programs can be a little more.
Do you think they need more volume? In other words, would they have the same effect if they were given the same amount of volume?
When I train, okay, do they need more volume? I think the better question is, is there a different optimal volume for them for hypertrophy? I do think it would be slightly shifted upwards for women compared to men, but not double. It might be that for men, hypothetically speaking, say 12 sets was optimal for a muscle group for a man, whereas maybe it would be 16 for a woman. But also, we talked about earlier, it depends. Every answer is it depends. You have the people who can recover better than others and who push themselves harder too. Yep. You have the people who, there's also some weird thing about tempo. Like you have those people who, like on chin-ups, they're like, and you're like, okay, they're done. Somehow they do another rep. And you're like, and then they get 3 more.
16 more. Yeah.
And you're like, what? How? Because I'm done. Like people always go, wow, you had 3 more in the tank. And I'm like, no, I wouldn't have gotten 1 more. It just looks like that because I'm a very explosive lifter.
Yeah.
I either explode up or it won't go up at all. But anyway.
I'm the same as you for the record.
So some of those people, I think the more grinder you are, that's tough to recover from. Those are harder to recover from than the, but anyway, there's a lot of factors at play, but it's how hard you push yourself versus your muscle damage and recovery genetics.
Yep.
So I do think they can do a little more volume and a little more like what's optimal volume and frequency for them is slightly higher. They don't seem to get as damaged and beat down. They seem to get beat down from trying to juggle too many forms of exercise, too many things.
Yep.
They tend to want to jam-pack their schedule, and they're like, and I don't know if men are, I'd be curious to see if modern day men are like that, because I'm kind of like, I don't want to plan as many things,
Yep.
But anyway, I think that adds to their stress, but if they had no stress in their lives in that way, they could recover even better. And their relationship stress, they care so much about their relationships, it really weighs on them. So anyway, there are a lot of different factors, and I'm probably going to get some stuff for that comment, because whenever you say there are differences between men and women, you get in trouble. And I'm like, man, I could never raise a kid, not on my own like a woman can. I could never do half the stuff they can do. And multitasking, they seem to be better at. I have so much respect for a lot of my women. I could not do what they do. I could never do. Life is so hard, and then you add a kid to the mix, and then you add 2 kids, and you're breastfeeding, and you're getting woken up at night. I don't know how the hell they do it. So I have the utmost respect, but I think there are definite differences, and we shouldn't try to be the same. As with regards to training, the biggest differences are goal related.
Yep.
The physiological differences, I think, are worth mentioning. Like you said, I think they recover faster, can handle a little bit more volume. And then you said the third piece was
the menstrual cycle.
The menstrual cycle.
So train differently during different phases of the cycle.
So this research got popular, and then Lauren Colenso Simple came around and just squashed it. I love it, because I was like, you're gonna get women.
She was in my lab. You know that?
Yeah, she's great.
She's awesome.
Yeah, but here's the deal. On average, strength doesn't fluctuate that much throughout the menstrual cycle, et cetera, but does on the individual level, just what you talked about with the trap bar deadlifts. I have women that are, especially if they're not on birth control, and it's crazy, because a lot of women, the day their period starts, they're weakest, but some are their strongest at that point. And I'd be like I had this client, Camille, in Phoenix, and I'd be like, did you start your period today? And then she's like, how'd you know? I go, because you just crushed your deadlift PR. Every time she would start her period, she was a monster. Other women don't even want to train when they start, especially hip thrusts. They don't want pressure on their abdomen. You got to know these things. You have to be aware of them and be sympathetic to it because everyone's different. Some are stronger, some are weaker. Some don't want to be there. They don't want to train. So you bargain with them. You say, oh, you start your period. You don't want to hip thrust. Don't hip thrust. Let's do kickbacks. Let's do this. Give them stuff that doesn't feel bad. So at least they make it in the gym and they feel good about themselves. But yeah, these are factors that men don't have in their lives and don't have to think about. It's an additional variable with women. And it definitely matters on the individual level because some women get so nauseous, so irritable. They don't even want to, we don't have to deal with that. That is a factor that should be considered in your program design, but just on a
personal coaching level,
on
not
a
a group
personal
level,
not a group level. I don't change my programs to reflect that, but in person, I definitely change things up if the person has really bad periods or period cramps and emotions associated with it. You absolutely have to change things up.
Yeah. So a factor to pay attention to, but perhaps no set rules that should be automatic based on generic cycle phases and length and things like that.
You look at I wonder if...
I think Lauren's research would agree with that.
Yeah,
for the most
but
part.
I wonder if hormones changed are unique because you look at the graph and it's like, here's testosterone, here's estrogen, here's progesterone. And then you look at like premenstrual, of course, progesterone is highest, I think, and then estrogen and testosterone are lowest. Of course, it makes sense that you'd be your weakest there, but it doesn't on a group level.
Well,
but maybe hormones are different depending on the person too.
That's the thing.
I also will tell you that like my girls are my San Diego squad is all natural, right? My Florida squad, most are all natural. But I always tell them, like, when girls get mad when I say all natural, they'll be like, they have breast implants. That's not what all natural means. That's not what all natural means in our world. Natty means you don't take gear. You don't take anabolic steroids.
Yeah.
You don't take SARMs. You don't take peptides. I don't even think peptides really are a factor now.
Depending on peptide you're talking about.
Which
Growth
peptides,
hormone.
right.
Yeah, right.
So I'm so close with these ladies. I've been training them for 7 years in groups. When you train women in groups, they talk, it's like I'm the gay friend, but I'm not gay. Like that's how I get treated.
Right.
They will talk
You're
about
the
anything.
inside. Yeah.
They will talk about anything in front of me because they're very comfortable. So I hear everything. And they'll be like, Coach, my testosterone levels came back. It's at 14. And I'm like, okay, like you're super horny. That's all you talk about is sex, and you're strong as hell. You can deadlift 385. You think you have a 14 testosterone level? Check it again.
Yeah.
But enough of them came back. I swear, like my average testosterone level of my clients is like not even 20. It's like probably in the teens. How? They're strong as hell. I start to wonder if really intense training lowers women's testosterone levels because normal is 6 to 90 for women. That's a 15-fold difference.
Yeah,
but you'd think some of these girls, they have these amazing physiques. Can I get someone in the 40s or 50s or 60s?
Yeah.
No one's at a 90.
Yeah.
But they're in the teens.
A lot of things going on
They're
there.
in the teens. So
yeah.
That's a whole other thing that I would love to look into is should we be periodizing to let their testosterone come up or anything? Because I'm like, or maybe that they're all just getting false readings because these places are lying to them to try to get them on TRT. Because I'm in a constant battle saying, you don't need TRT. Look at you look amazing. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you. Those are really good insights. That's a question that comes up a lot, and there's the research on that. That's great. People can interpret that, but it's always interesting to hear perspective of somebody who's been in the trenches with people trying to get as strong as they can, trying to grow muscle, and seeing how that played into your coaching. And I think that was a very helpful answer. And I know a lot of coaches and a lot of individual people are going to go, okay, great. Now I have freedom to take the best option for me, depending on where I'm at. One last real technical question here, and then I got a couple more. But the technical one is regarding the glutes versus other muscles, right? You've mentioned this several times now, but I want to make sure this was really clear because I thought it was really helpful. We talk about training as if all of our muscles respond to training the exact same way, right? And so this much intensity, this much load, this much frequency, this is how you progress. But have there been any themes over your career that you've noticed about the glutes as a collective musculature that are, significantly different than the delts or the triceps or the pecs or anything like that? Anything that jump out of either maybe things to do or things not to do that's special about the glutes?
I just think they're more simple. A lot of muscles are simpler because, well, what I like is comparing the glutes to the delts.
Yep.
They're both ball and socket joints, a lot of movement, a lot of range of motion around them. But delts, you have 3 subdivisions.
Yep.
Anterior, middle, and lateral, and you really target one division over the other. So when you talk about delt volume, when you train any upper body pressing movement, be it dips, decline, flat, push-ups, bench, incline, shoulder press, behind the neck press, every one of them will train the anterior delts, and then going out expanding out in the frontal plane more is going to activate the middle delts a lot, the side delts, but not rear delts don't get super high on pressing.
Yep.
But then the rear delts get activated during all the pulling motions,
Yep.
from pull downs to angled pull downs to rows, to even rows upright, like more upright. Yeah. So the rear delts will get activated with a lot of pulling movements. So they can handle a lot of volume because you can also add in isolation movements, but if you wanted to, you could do 3 sets of rear delt raises 3 times a week. If you really wanted to, you could do 3 sets of laterals 3 times a week with variety. You could do 3 sets of front raises 3 times a week, and you could be doing presses and pulls. So they can handle a lot of volume. The delts can, but they do, shoulder flexion, abduction, and then they shoulder extension and in different planes too, and different angles and stuff. So they're a very versatile muscle group. When you look at the glutes, the glutes aren't just the glute, it's the glute max, the glute med, the glute min, and they carry out hip extension, abduction, external rotation, posterior pelvic tilt, but also posterior pelvic tilt should just be thought of as like short arc hip hyperextension. But anyway, like you can bend over and do abduction in the transverse, like being knees to chest abduction versus upright versus leaning back, like frontal plane. So they do several different joint actions, and then you can vary the exercises to work more in the stretch position, to stretch you more, to work the stretch more, to squeeze you more, to have more hip hyperextension, to work more in the stretch position. It's complicated, but it's just how complicated you want to make it. It's like for glutes, okay, just get really strong at Bulgarians, Romanians, and hip thrusts,
right,
and you're going to have pretty good glute max development. And then throw in some abdo, do some lateral band walks 3 times a week to warm up, and you'll be fine. But no, there's more to it. Okay, well let's think of other muscles. Quads. Well, it's so simple. It's pretty much just the knee is a hinge joint. All right, just get really strong at either any one of these or a variety of them. But I would say they all probably build the quads very effectively. The first is squats, and probably high bar, even better. Heel elevated, even better. Front squats, high bar squats, whatever. But get strong at squats, you're probably going to have nice quads. But now add in hack squats, or the pendulum squat, or belt squats, or leg press in a quad dominant fashion. How can you not have big vasties? But what about the rec fem? It's a 2-joint muscle. If you want to maximize rec fem development, you need to add in a leg extension type movement, a single joint. Well, so you add in leg extensions, but leg extensions are even better when you lean back. They're probably even better when you stress the stretched position. That's on like that prime machine that really you can change the load.
Great.
If you have a plate loaded that's just pure plate like the Titan, then you're only working the squeeze. I actually like to do that because I'm like, everything we do works the stretched position. I like working the squeeze positions. But anyway, you could also do sissy squats, or you could do reverse Nordics. and maybe you need to do some hip flexion too to maximize rec fem growth, but it's not quite as complicated as the glutes.
Yep.
Hamstrings can be complicated because there's a lot of studies. Hamstrings, there's a ton of research on because of hamstring strain injuries.
Yeah, injuries, right.
And these range from EMG to
It's my favorite
MRI.
muscle, for the record, and it is the one I think people train the least and should train more of.
Yes, because
completely underrated.
Foot position, like with leg extensions, doesn't seem to alter VAST recruitment, but it does for hamstrings.
And knee pain and other foot injuries and back injuries, man, hamstrings. Like people just don't train them.
So you have knee flexion movements and you have hip extension movements. With hip extension, you could go squeeze position. With back extensions, like loaded, 45s and back extensions, and you can go in knee flexion. You can work them in a stretch with seated hamstring. So with seated hamstring curls, you should be leaning forward if possible, or just at least as upright as possible. Don't be leaning back.
Yep.
You want as much stretch, but also make sure that pad is down far, and you make sure it's working you all the way up into full knee extension.
Yep.
So you're getting the maximum stretch. But then you can do lying leg curls, kneeling leg curls, and they all seem to work different, maybe like slightly different areas. Variation is a good thing for hammies. Okay, calves. Calves are probably the simplest exercise to train because what we're finding is seated calf raises don't appear to add to the mix, and neither does the squeeze position.
Yep.
Like there are now a few studies showing that calves almost don't even need to come up all the way. You can just do the stretch position, but if you do come up all the way, extend the set with some lengthened partials or just do more sets. But yeah, if you just want to do, a quick 3 sets of calf raises, just do standing. You don't need to do seated. That tends to, it seems to build the soleus just the same. And
but the seated is going to make it hard for your gastroc to get involved at all. It's going to basically be 0, right? On the seated, the calf raise.
Yeah. So seated been shown to not, it doesn't add to the equation when you're doing straight legged. I don't think I've seen us doing like donkey calf raise. Does that add? I don't think it does. There is some evidence that turning the toes in versus out can help.
Sure.
But yeah, like basically, the calves are probably the simplest muscle to train because just do standing calf raises, work the stretch position, you're good to go. Can the calves handle the volume? Do you need the variety in calves when you do that you can with glutes? Pretty much they just do plantar flexion, so you don't really need. So it's like, and then you look at the pecs. Okay, there's the upper, middle, and lower fibers. If you just get strong at like low incline press, you probably get most of your bang for your buck. But then you're like, okay, should I work all the angles? Should I do weighted dips? Should I do incline press? What incline? Should I vary the incline? Should I do 15, 30, 45, 60, 75, 90? Obviously not 90.
Degrees,
then 90 degrees would be mostly all front delts. But like, what about now your pec isolation movements? Okay. Should you do flies or pec deck or cable crossovers? Should you just focus on the stretch and just do dumbbell flies? Do you need to come up all the way? Why? You lose tension. Just do lengthened partials. Okay. Well, so flies, do you need the squeeze? Should you do crossovers? Focus on the squeeze. Pec deck, where you really focus on, we don't have enough research, but to me, it just makes sense.
Yep.
It just makes sense to be strong throughout a full range of motion and to incorporate a lot of variety. But we it's like, the more divergent the muscle, the bigger the muscle and more subdivisions, the more complicated, and the more joint actions, the more complicated it becomes. Lats, does the stretch help a lot? They have better moment arms, like coming up all the way. How do you stretch the lats the most? How do you stretch the pecs the most? Like this scientist named Chasm came out and said you stretch the pecs more with kind of like with a 45-degree arm angle.
Right.
All right. But what about when I do guillotine, because you can lower the bar. I feel some of the fibers, upper fibers, stretching more that way?
Mhm.
Should we be doing guillotine work? That doesn't agree with some people's shoulders.
Yep.
And it's like, what about the lats? Okay, how do you stretch the lats the most? Kazan would say do a cross
Cross the
arm,
body. Yep.
cross body motion that might stretch the lats the most.
Mhm.
Arguably so, but sometimes you can have, if you're big muscles, you might not get the full stretch. Your anatomy your rib cage, for me, I can't seem to get over that much on these, but would it stretch my lats the most? And then you start altering your spinal and your scapula and stuff and all that, and you can get a better stretch. And I think this stuff is very important. We should talk about it for what's optimal and not. But what happens is everyone starts focusing on optimal, and then the pendulum goes too far this way, and you have these nerds like ripping on bent over rows and like weighted chin-ups and stuff. And like, I like it because it's funny, because interesting, I contradict myself. I've always liked sumo for glutes compared to conventional, but I've always liked supinated narrow for lats compared to wide grip.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And it's like, but I'm not consistent, because
No.
I'll say, well, supinated stretch you more, but wide grip activates a little bit more.
Then why
But
don't you
in
do
my
the
opinion, for
sumos?
lats, you should probably do some stuff in the frontal plane, some stuff more in the sagittal plane, some stuff that goes full overhead in the full stretch, even though the lats don't have good moment arms or activate here that much. You should just always use a variety. Some muscles, because here with the lats, you've got different divisions,
Yep.
upper, middle, lower, and how do you maximize the size of each? And it's like, I like analyzing everything, geeking out on the biomechanics. Just don't let it take away from like the basics and like getting strong at the basics, because if you look at like the way Tom Platz trained his quads, he was an animal. He got super strong at squats and hack squats. He'd turn the hack squat into a sissy squat.
Yeah.
And these leg extension, you're seeing him like flying up on these leg extensions, screaming, and he'd go until he was doing lengthened supersets 30 years ago, before they were a thing, like before they were popular. It's that intensity. But yeah, he had the greatest quad development of all time.
Yeah, they're absurd.
And that was before they were even. Now you see, since then, tell me a body part that's bigger on a guy 30 years ago than today. Only Platz with his legs, his quads.
Yep, that's it. Okay, awesome. That was really, really, really helpful. Last thing I want to get from you here is, I was telling you this before we started. You're a unicorn in the field for many reasons. One of which is, I think you're one of the very few people who I really respect and enjoy, who has actually built themselves, and it's not fair, but mostly on a single brand, right? So this is your company names, this is your exercise equipment, your Instagram, your social media is the Glute Guy, right? Despite the fact you have a PhD and you've done all the things we talked about earlier, you've pushed into a single brand. And why that matters is, how do you handle that then when research comes out and it says your brand maybe isn't great, right? So in other words, what I'm saying is, if you were to be the lemon juice guy, and then all of a sudden research comes out and says, hey, lemon juice is actually not great for you. And like, oh my God, what do you do? Your career, like, this has happened many times in your career, right? There have been many, many studies come out that, as you talked about earlier, have countered maybe what you've thought before. And I think you've done such a beautiful job over the years of being so overt, so honest with that. You're the first guy I hear about when new studies come out on the hip thrust that show negative results. Not because you're criticizing the study. Like, if that is true of the study, you'll bring that up. But rarely do you do that. Almost always it is hey guys, updating our thinking here. Turns out I had this idea. It doesn't work anymore. Now it looks like that's not the case. And this is sort of how we're modifying it. So the question that I'm eventually smuggling in here is, how have you handled that? How do you think about that? And then secondarily, what are the most known criticisms of the hip thrust? What has been shown scientifically? What is it not good at? What is it limited in? What are the downsides? Because I don't want this entire discussion to feel like just a big, glutes
Hip
is
thrust
great, hip
party.
thrusts are great. And I don't mind bringing this up because you have done this more than anybody in your career about what looks like sabotaging your own brand. But to me, it's only elevated you even more because when you do say things that are positive about the hip thrust, I feel like you generally give a fair representation of literature and you don't run away from when things don't support your brand. So what do we know about the downside? There's no really cons. That's probably not there's no negatives of a hip thrust, but what are the limitations? What are they not good at? When is it not the best choice? And then how have you handled that when that's happened in your career and saving your brand? If that's probably not a word that resonates with you, but you know what I mean.
Great questions. If I was the hip thrust guy, yes, I'm the guy who popularized it. If I was the hip thrust guy, I'd be screwed because well, I don't know. If we had enough studies, you're going to find it's useful for some things, but it's not. Yeah. Then I'd be like, oh God, I said this. But being the glute guy, I just need to flow with the research. And what I want to do is be the first to notify my people of a study. So if no one will care, and I want to fund this, I want to carry out the studies because then I'm the hero either way.
Yeah.
If I do a study on full squats versus parallel squats, and
for glute development
and full squats wins, all the Olympic weightlifters are like, hooray, Contreras saves the day. And then if it's to parallel, the powerlifters get to say, see, suck it, Olympic lifters, we told you. But the Plotkin study, Menno Henselmans and I funded that.
Yeah.
80 freaking grand we spent of our own money, like 40 grand each. Props to Menno.
He's
we wanted
stuff in
MRI
our lab too. He's great.
Yeah, we wanted MRI because we don't fully trust ultrasound for glutes. For other muscles, but glutes, it's tricky. So anyway, I was so glad that I got to present that and helped be involved in that because it was a needed study and I was wrong. Now, the first time what you're talking about is with hip thrust with speed development. So the first study on the topic was from my PhD thesis. It looked at adolescent male rugby players and it showed that front squats led to greater vertical jumps, but hip thrust led to better acceleration improvements in sprinting. And that was in line with the force vector hypothesis.
Right.
You want to jump higher, put more force on the ground that way. You want to run faster, put more force on the ground that way. It's common sense. And then you see this in the research, kind of like you see boom and then boom. And then with hip thrust, it went back again to here. So the first study showed great results. So then a couple of researchers designed studies. Here's the deal.
I know you got hammered on the force vector theory eventually.
I got hammered on it, and now it's like legit. Now it's
back.
Yeah, it's back.
Yeah.
So the next couple of researchers who study, I got to look back at these papers. Chris Bishop was one of them. And there was one Chinese or Japanese baseball study. I think was the lesson. But anyway, like that baseball study showed that like hip thrusts grew the baseball players' squat strength just as effectively as squats did. And that's what I found in I did a twin study and the hip thrust, the hip thrust twin grew her squat. Went from a 95-pound squat to a 135-pound squat without squatting just in 6 weeks of hip thrusting. And it was crazy. And it cleaned up her form too. Like she hip thrust. So, but you look at those couple of studies. I want to look back at two things. I don't know why I don't know this. Number one, their tempo. If they're doing like a 2-second up and 4-second down, that is the slowest hip thrust known to man. This is one of the biggest things people are wrong about in the industry is that tempo matters so much for hypertrophy. It doesn't. Look at a lot of these bodybuilders, they're heaving away. They're using momentum, they're exploding because intuitively they know. A lot of them were doing like length and partials too, just doing bottom position stuff. They're sometimes ahead of the curve. Sometimes they're dead wrong, but sometimes the bros had it right. Anyway, these people out there, and they'll swear by it. It's like they think that like the slower the tempo, the better it is for muscle growth. And a review paper by Schoenfeld and Krieger, I think, showed 2 to 8 seconds led to the same muscle growth. But I'm
I
telling
think it's
you,
more than that, by the way.
it
I think it's like 2 to 15. Like it almost
I
doesn't
don't know.
matter.
The only thing is when you have like a 10-second concentric, I think there's only one study on the super slow method. I think it was 10 seconds up, 5 seconds down, and that led to less growth. But you can get a variety of results, but also a new study on cheating. Momentum, Brad Schoenfeld did this study too, and they showed with like curls and I don't know if it was triceps, but basically heaving away at curls versus very strict curls. And they had the same biceps growth.
Yeah.
So the strict people can say, this is what I love about presenting the research, because you're the champion. The strict people get to say, see, you went lighter, used less load, and got the same muscle growth, and it's safer. Clearly, it's going to be safer. You're going to have less injuries. And the heaving crowd can say, see, you went heavier, heaved away. You're probably going to grow other muscles because you're using some front delt and some
connective tissue development, and it's more athletic.
It's more athletic, and they grew the same biceps. You didn't need to go light and
super slow. Train like an athlete. Right.
So that's what I like about being.
That's funny you said that because my initial instinct was that, right? Being on more the athletic side generally, I'm like, I know. I've been like this whole don't use momentum thing, I've been against for forever. Because I'm like, no, like move, learn to move. You'll develop.
And look at the bodybuilders were heaving and using momentum back in the day. Look at Ronnie Coleman. Look at these guys. They're not going super slow negatives. And I don't think super slow negatives help with muscle growth either.
No, but they are very tiring in terms of like they will suck all your recovery reserves out of you.
I think it's good to do for variety. It's good to do for maybe it does. Some of these things lead to growth initially, but then you just revisit them. But anyway, I think hip thrusts are like 1 rep per second at my gym, maybe 1.5. Say what you want, criticize me all you want, but scoreboard. Let's look at before and after pictures. And I don't mean to be cocky, but like I get annoyed when look at my girl's glute development. Do you think we're lacking? And we're doing explosive hip thrusts. Okay, so what I think those initial studies, I got to look at 2 things. Number one, were they still sprinting? Because if these were athletes and you have them stop sprinting
for 8 weeks,
then this is a detrain. This is to see if hip thrusts counteract the effects of detraining.
Yeah.
If they didn't get faster, but they didn't get slower, that's huge.
Yeah.
You can hip thrust, and while you stop sprinting and retain your sprint speed.
Yeah.
That would be cool to know.
And speed is, as we know, is the first thing to go.
Yeah.
So not sprinting for 6 weeks, if this is actually the case, which it may not be, that would be enormous. You would expect a significant loss. Yeah.
But also, if it's a slow tempo, that doesn't have ecological validity, and that's my problem in the research.
As another way of saying that's not how people do it in the real world.
No.
So
I think maybe some of the other studies that came after that. So then you had a couple of studies show that hip thrusts didn't build sprint speed, and that's when I came out with my blog post saying I was wrong. I thought I was ahead of the research. I wasn't. Everyone respected me for that. And now it's years later. Now there's actually a lot of evidence that hip thrusts are better than squats. But in general, horizontal exercises seem to be better at developing sprint speed. But this is interesting because the Plotkin study showed similar glute growth, but the squat group had more quad and adductor growth. Twice the quad and over 2.5 times, I think, the adductor growth. Neither grew the hamstrings or glute medius minimus. So you can't tell me in sports quads and adductors aren't important. So I would never say stop squatting because you need quads, you need adductors, you need glutes, but you do need strength through a full range of motion, and squats probably get you more glute strength in the hips flex position, hip thrust in the hips extended position, but there's something about explosive movements. And there's even a study showing that bands might be more effective than free weights because you explode up. So I think we need to look more into. I have a few different glute. In the first room in Glute Lab, Fort Lauderdale, is our hip thrust room. But I'll have in there a kneeling. The Glute Builder has a kneeling glute isolator. It's kneeling hip extension.
Oh, yeah.
You're bent over, you're kneeling, and you do back extension. It's like Sornex's back attack machine, but kneeling, okay? And then you have the reverse glute ham. That's a Rogers piece where you're laying on your back and there's a pad and it's almost looks like a leg curl pad, but you move it in hip extension the whole way. Well, when I do 20 rep set of hip thrust versus the kneeling glute isolate versus the reverse glute ham, a 20 rep set will take not even 30 seconds with the hip thrust. It might be 25 seconds. A kneeling glute isolator might be 35, and the reverse glute ham will be 40 to 60. It'll
it's
actually
2
be like
minutes.
60 seconds.
It's a long time.
And so these people talk about tempo and they don't consider the range of motion. So how to tell me you don't know about weight training without telling me you don't know about weight training is mention that all exercises need the same tempo.
Yeah.
What do people do with calf raises? What about shrugs? Am I supposed to do shrugs with 2 seconds up, 4 seconds down? No. Shrugs are 1 second. You don't need to. So anyway, I think that helps with athleticism is these rapid, like with hip thrusts, boom, explode up. They don't beat you up as much. They don't cause much muscle damage. They're explosive concentrics. You don't have to control the negative, and you can say the negative is huge. Is it for acceleration? When you're leaning forward, accelerating, it's pure concentric. There's not an eccentric phase with acceleration sprinting. I think concentric is king, and I think you need to power through the whole stride, and that's why hip thrusts are great. So
you're also not saying it's the only exercise to do.
No, hell no. You look at what
just like one.
You look at what
of the many.
What the popular sprint coaches have always drawn. What is US ATF or whatever, the track and field? What have they always done? Vertical, like Olympic squats, RDLs, Olympic lifts.
Yep.
But like Charlie Francis was throwing in the reverse leg press.
Yep.
That's a kickback, And so add in some hip thrusts, but just make sure you're not overdoing the strength training because I would become the coach and I would over-prioritize strength and I'd actually make them slower. I'd make them slower.
Yeah.
Because I'd be obsessed with getting them stronger at these exercises and really you need to save your juice for the explosive stuff, the sprinting, the plyos.
Just like you said at the beginning, don't forget the priorities, right?
Yes.
Like make sure that the goal's there. You're just saying that potentially you could consider adding a horizontal movement if horizontal speed is
the priority,
is the goal.
Yeah.
Okay. So
but real quick, so that's the first time I had to say I was wrong.
Force factor
but
thing,
then I kind of end up being right. Anyway, I need to update that.
Not a good start to your own criticisms here, but okay.
Up that up. Then later on, with that hip thrust versus squat study, I thought for sure hip thrusts were going to win. And this is what annoyed me.
Win in terms of bigger
beat
growth.
Out squats for glute growth.
Yep.
They tied. They tied for upper, middle, and lower glute max. And so then it leads to the next hypothesis. Well, we equated volume. You don't have to equate volume in the real world. You can handle more volume. What if we would have done more volume? Blah, blah, blah. We need more studies. But I was wrong because I thought hip thrusts would beat squats and they tied. It was on beginners. Beginners seem to have more stretch-related growth due to sarcomerogenesis, which tends to stop at around, say, 6-8 weeks, whatever. But I did make a post saying I was wrong. Well, why didn't all the other guys make posts saying they were wrong too? Because they all thought squats would annihilate hip thrusts.
Yeah.
I thought hip thrusts would beat out squats. We were all wrong, but I was the only one to say it.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's the secret. To answer your question, how do you pivot, I guess, as new research comes out? You be the first to announce it, and then you change your programming to reflect that. You learn and you evolve. And that's the secret. No one's mad at you. In fact, they trust you more. But it's really hard for guys to do. It is so hard for guys to say, I was wrong. It's okay for guys to admit they were wrong like 5 years later. Oh, back in the day, we used to think that squats grew your arms because we'd say, do squats and it, raises your testosterone growth hormone. Your arms are going to get jacked. And now we know that's not true.
This is a real thing what you're saying, by the way.
Yeah.
That's
now
a real
we
example.
know that's not true.
Yeah.
The hormone hypothesis, it was probably smart. I like that we told people that, but we were wrong.
Yeah.
But yeah, we got them to squat and deadlift by pretending it was going to build your arms.
Yeah.
Now,
I
guys,
used to say that all the time.
I used to say it too. I came across a document I gave out to my first gym, and it was like so pseudoscientific. It was, it was full of pseudoscience. But anyway, it's fine for guys to admit they were wrong 5 years later, 10 years later. But at the time, it's hard to say, guys, this study just came out. Looks like I was wrong. I've been telling people that, and you can say, okay, I'd still like to see it in advanced lifters. I would still like to see it, but it looks
duration,
like if you say front squats suck because you're not building quads, you're just limited by upper body, your quads could keep going, but you cave and you fall. And then the study comes out saying front squats and lead to the same quad growth as back squats. You should tell your people. If you're a scientist, you tell your people. If you're a zealot, you don't mention that study. You pretend it never existed. If you say hip thrusts suck and a study comes out showing hip thrust tied squats, you need to come out to your people and say, looks like I was wrong. Hip thrusts, there might be more to hip thrusts.
Yeah.
But either way, you should be saying we should do both. I still think squats are better than hip thrusts for glute length, or I still think hip thrusts are better than squats. But as of now, we should probably be doing both, especially since they kind of combine to form comprehensive glute strength through a full range of motion, full spectrum glute strength, and especially because they don't beat each other up. Like one doesn't beat you up as more. One's more full body, grows the quads and adductors too. One is more isolation. And guys will look you straight in the face and say, don't do any glute isolation work. And I wish women could say, oh, I shouldn't do hip thrusts? No. I shouldn't do kickbacks? No. I shouldn't do abduction? No. Well, what do you do for your chest? Do you just do bench? Oh, you do pec deck too? What do you do for your arms? Do you do curls? Because you could just grow them doing chin-ups and close grip bench. You do curls and tricep extensions. Oh, what about your side delts? Do you do lateral raises? Because you could just say just do military press out to the sides. Oh, you don't even believe. So you're giving me advice you don't follow yourself, you weird hypocrite. Do you not realize that, you weird man? I don't know why guys do that with glutes. But anyway, that's how you how you navigate that throughout your career is you be the first to announce it to your people, you admit it, and then they just like you more because they go, this guy's always going to update us. This guy's always going to give us the science. And then if you disagree with it, like fund your own study and look into it. You'll just learn. All we can do is learn and grow from it. And then if you're the first person to point out that hip thrusts were not needed, and I could pivot. I'm still the glute guy. I just said, hey, it turns out we didn't need to do squats. We just needed to do these, throw electrodes on your glutes. And I'd be the hero because people would be, we didn't need exercise, but I don't believe that.
Yeah.
And then the second part to your question was, what are the pitfalls with hip thrusts? I do believe when you're an expert on a topic, I could be the number one. I could write the best article to convince you that hip thrusts are amazing, but I could also write the most convincing article to say that they're worthless. I should know both sides of the argument. I should know it better than anyone. So people will say, it takes forever to set up. It's a pain in the butt to set up. How did we all used to set up these stations back in the day? I don't like, if I go to a gym, I don't want to set up the station.
Yeah, it is the number one reason I don't do it.
Yes.
Literally the number one reason. I'm like,
but if you have
God.
a plate-loaded device, if you've got the hammer strength, the BC strength, the Nautilus glute drive, the booty builder.
These are all different hip thrust machines.
If you've
one
got
of
a
them's
Smith
yours,
machine even with a bench nearby it, because sometimes they put the bench right near the, or sometimes some gyms are putting benches right by their platforms so people can quickly, and it also matters how strong you are. If there's a bar with one, at my gym, it's so easy because I got the BC strength thruster setups. There's bigger plates. The bar is sitting there loaded with 135. You want to add on plates, we got plates with handles on them. So you slide them on.
Yeah.
You got the glute loop there to connect it if you want to do bar plus band. You got the pad on the bar. You have even an Eric's pad to sit on if you're shorter. And it's all right there. It makes it so much easier.
I don't know if people realize what you said a second ago, but your company, you specifically make weight plates that are larger in diameter. And the reason you do that is because then it makes it much easier to do hip thrusts with them.
Yeah, you just slide the bar over. When you have big legs and you have standard plates.
And I got to slide myself underneath. It's a giant pain in the ass.
And then you go to get in position, you're like, oh, and it's crushing you. And you have to kind of like climb hip thrust.
When I saw you came out with those, I chuckled so hard because I'm like, oh my God, of course you would. Of course you would make the first person to change weight plates in 50 years.
No, I got that idea from Mark Bell, came out with his wagon wheels.
Oh.
And so my coaches at Glute Lab were hip thrusting off of them. And at that time,
God, Mark is the best.
At that time, I was rolling the bar up onto rubber mats, just the 2-inch rubber mats that I got from Elite FTS. We'd roll them over the mats. And I'm like, the mats aren't necessary if you have plates that are 2 inches bigger in diameter. Or
Makes sense.
2 inches bigger in radius. Sorry. So we came up with the bigger plates. The hip thrust station is huge. And my girls at Fort Lauderdale, they like the rotisserie station the most. The barbell, the standard, they like the rotating pad the most. Then it would be the Thruster Pro, which I used the hammer strengths model because my hammer strength almost got it perfect. But why did they make this tiny plate peg? You only fit 4 plates on. I've got girls that are strong. And you get a strong man, they're using 6, 7 plates. So I made the plate pegs bigger, and then I made the foot plate bigger to accommodate 5-footers. That's something no one does for women. These poor women out there, they finally get a hip thrust, and these gym owners
can't fit on it.
The gym owners are so bad at knowing what the best equipment to buy, and the manufacturers don't even test it on a shorter woman who's the market with
a hip thrust,
glute machines.
Yep. So the outside of the criticism of setting it up and the pain, what would be maybe the next
Hip pain.
Hip pain. Oh, like the bar on my
You get
hip.
super strong.
I bruised the hell out of myself there many times. Yeah.
You think I, of all people, would have the best padding? It's hard.
Yeah.
It's
Well, I mean, you're still putting, I don't care what kind of polyurethane or whatever material you have, foam, you're still going to put several 100 pounds through that foam.
Yeah. So there's an optimal thickness and density combination that, but it's really, if
Hard
you
to
get
get.
it thicker, it interferes with your hip flexion.
So outside of setup.
If you get it denser, it doesn't pad as well. If you get it too soft, the bar sinks through. So the hip pain and the bruises and the scar, and then in some people it can get bad. Like my girls will be like, look at this. And so sometimes when you have these crazy bruises, you can either avoid the hip thrust, but sometimes I'll sit on my clients' laps backwards and you do partner hip thrusts. They hip thrust me. And I'm like, I weigh 240, but I'm heavier. It feels heavier. I go, if you can get me for 20, that's hard. So they either hip thrust me, or they do single leg hip thrust, or they do the kneeling, or like some machine that doesn't put the stress in the exact same place. Okay, and then you would say, from a functional standpoint, you'll still hear people say, you're lying down, it's not functional. Those people are dead wrong. I think hip thrust transfer better. If you just said compare it to squats, I think hip thrust transfer better to sprinting speed. The research on horizontal plyos says they're better for agility too, but I think squats would be better at agility. But I think they're better for rotational power, because when you rotate, you're more in full hip extension. So I think for rotational power, hip thrusts are going to be better. And then they seem to tie for transfer to the deadlift, hip thrusts and squats. But I bet you squats build better strength, deadlift strength off the floor, and hip thrusts probably build better lockout strength.
Makes sense.
As far as just straight up, they transfer the deadlift similarly. They lead to similar horizontal pressing strength, pushing against a wall as hard as you can, which is a very important sports functional performance outcome. Hip thrusts seem to be better at isometric mid-thigh pull due to joint angle specificity.
No doubt. Yep.
And for jumping, they're better for horizontal jumping.
Broad jumps, things like that.
Broad jumps, but then for vertical jumping, they probably tie. We think squats would be better, but in the literature, they probably either tie or maybe a slight edge for squats. But the bottom line is you should be doing both. You should be doing both of them. Oh yeah, they neither transfer to lumbar extension strength. What else is there? They don't build lumbar extension specific strength neither.
Bone mineral density? Any research on that?
None on bone mineral density, but where would you do it? In the lumbar spine?
Yeah.
Yeah. If that was the case, I would think squats would be better. But anyway, I think what that shows is for sports performance, you need a variety of exercises that multivectorial training, force vector training, do heavy, medium, and light stuff in your main directions. Yes, sagittal plane stuff is going to be paramount in sports because, we stand on 2 feet, but don't be afraid to. But anyway, so the functional crowd, they're wrong. It's really hard for people to fathom that an exercise can transfer, like supine exercise can transfer to sprinting.
Yep.
But it does. Then the other arguments would be, I've heard it all, okay? It's really bad for your posture. It's going to grow your waist. It's not going to grow your waist. It doesn't activate the obliques much or the rectus abdominis. It's not going to screw up your posture. It's not going to break your back as long as not as long as you just have
haven't
to
actually seen hardly any back injuries.
No,
with heavy, really?
There's not nearly as many back injuries. But I think why powerlifters don't like it is they see someone like me doing all this weight. So they're like, if that guy can hip thrust, then I can. And they load up too heavy. I started with 185 back in the day and worked my way up gradually. You got to start light and get full hip extension and work your way up gradually. And get that feeling of that full glute squeeze and the full hip extension, full hip hyperextension. And so they'll do it and they're going so heavy, they're only working the bottom ranges and they don't feel it much. If they would have went lighter and went full, say they went light, like 135 their very first time, and did a pause at the top in full hip extension and did a set of 15 with a 3-second pause at the top, their glutes would have been lit up and they would be convinced that it works well. But instead they lit up 405 and they did 80% reps where they failed to get the 20% of full hip extension, didn't lock it out, didn't pause at the top because they could never reach there in the first place, and had anterior pelvic tilt and full spinal extension, trying to pretend you're coming up higher, but the bar didn't rise any higher. They just altered their torso to make it look like they went higher.
And then their back hurts the next day.
Yeah, and then their back hurts. It doesn't feel right. They don't even feel their glutes. And they're like, this is stupid. Why am I even doing this?
Yeah.
That it's redundant. If a study on squats showed that it built the glutes the same, why do it?
Yep.
But when would they use that argument for any other muscle group? If lateral raises built the side delts is the same as military press, which guy would say don't do laterals then? They'd say do them both.
Yep.
If leg curls and stiff leg deadlifts built one of the hamstrings the same, would they be okay with that? They'd say do both. And they'd probably say, I bet you they grow different port, like the proximal versus distal or different subdivisions. We didn't look at the whole level of muscle, the full length of muscle in the semitendinosus, semimembranosus, and then long head of the biceps femoris and short head. They would be skeptical, but they're quick to throw out glute isolation movements.
Yeah. Whenever I think about this topic, a couple things jump to my mind. One of them is false dichotomy, and the other is mutually exclusive, right? So when we think about this, nowhere ever do I recall you saying things like you should only ever hip thrust, or that the hip thrust is ultimately always better, or like any of these things. So when I say false dichotomy, what I mean is you don't have to do a hip thrust or any glute exercise as your only option. And you're not saying it's the best option. It's just looking at research to say, is it actually working? And when studies come out to suggest it works the same or better or less, it depends on the outcome goal, right? It depends on what we're training for. And all we're looking, to put sort of words in your mouth, is what do we know about the quality for this outcome? And there's never a rationale to think it is only ever going to be, say, a hip thrust versus a squat, or a hip thrust versus an RDL, or hip thrust. You can do both. There's no rule that says you have to choose squat or this one, right? And there's also no rule of you can't do both at different times. It's never ever going to be an answer of, is this exercise better than that one? That's just not how this stuff works. It is simply, what do we know that is positive? What do we know that is potentially limitations? How do I put my person in the best position to likely succeed as a starting place, right? Research, as you've outlined thus far, it only shows us what's most likely to work most people most of the time.
Yep.
It's just a starting place. From then you have to coach.
It's so weird because you've been to my gym in San Diego.
Yep.
Like, I have strong clients. They're impressive. I would say we're the strongest all-female, all-natural, all-female gym in the world. I wish we could, I wish like there was like some gym in Brazil or Russia and we tested them.
Yeah.
We tested them and they said, let's compete. Because I could tell my girls, we got called out. We got to compete with them. It'd be fun. But what would you do? StrongLifting? Which exercise would you do? But like, in StrongLifting, the big six, I'd love to take on other gyms in the world who think they're stronger than us. And these girls don't take stuff. They're, like I said, all natural. And we are so strong at chin-ups, bench press, military press, squats, deadlifts, and hip thrusts. Are we as strong as the best powerlifters? No, not at squats and deads. But I got girls squatting above 315. One of the girls in Strong Lead Comp squatted 405. One deadlifted 425, 405, 385, three girls 385. So we're not some wimpy gym, but it's so weird. You'll see criticisms of me, and they're like, he just gives us girls hip thrusts and bands. And I've never given that because I don't know the answer. So it's always been kind of that rule of thirds, a third from vertical, a third from horizontal, a third from lateral rotary. But I do wonder, okay, if volume wasn't equated, what if you did just do hip thrusts and bands? And you contrasted that to their programs, I bet you'd get the same glute growth without quad, hamstring, and adductor growth. And then you could say, what's your goal? Do you want just glute growth or do you want all of it?
Yeah.
And then if you want all of it, probably do the rule of thirds. If you want more quads, then focus more on, quad dominant movements. If you want more hams, focus more on hinges. But yeah, like do your squats in a quad, like more upright.
Right.
Do a little more volume from the squat lunge category. If you want more hamstrings, do more hingy stuff. But one thing I like about hip thrusts is it's one of the most everyone can do a hip thrust. People have bad anthropometries or poor anthropometries for squatting and deadlifting. But hip thrusts, it's a bridge.
Yep.
You just put the bar in the middle of wherever the middle of that bridge is, and the hips, and you thrust. And anyway, what you said though, you hit the nail on the head. They're all tools, and if you're starting out and you can only afford, you could be 80% as good of a carpenter with these tools, but you want to be the best carpenter in the world. You want to be the best at your job. You better have a lot of different specialty tools.
Yep.
And that's what I like, having all the machines, all the exercise variations. I just told you how we can still do hip thrusts when their hips are hurting, when they're bruised up. Or I can tell you when someone's low back is hurting, here's what we do. When your knees are hurting, here's what you do. If your inner thighs are too sore, here's what you do. We have protocols for everything. If this gives you pain, try this. If you're old and don't want this, then we're going to do this instead. You got to have a lot of tools.
Yeah.
And what if you're trying to grow your glutes without growing your legs? Then hip thrusts and glute bridges become a lot more friendlier options.
So one more question I have for you. Why is it so hard to grow the glutes without targeting the legs?
Okay, because you look at some of the most effective glute exercise are squats, lunges, deadlifts. They work a lot of muscle mass. So let's think about the glutes. Ideally, the knee would stay bent. Why? Because that's going to take the hamstrings out of it largely. When the knees are bent, the hamstrings are slackened, the glutes are going to take up more of the brunt of hip extension. All right, but then when you sink really deep, how are you going to work the glutes without working the adductors when you're going super deep? You do deep squat. The deeper you go, the more adductors you bring into play. So whenever you go really deep, you're going to work the adductors. If you're doing anything with knee extension, you're also working the quads. There's some evidence that when you carry out knee and hip extension at the same time, the glutes don't do as much. They don't activate as much because you're coordinating two things and you're not focusing on driving the hips forward maximally. You're coordinating those two actions. So it's like, all right, straight leg hip extension is great for glutes, but it also works a lot of hammies. Knee extension work is great for glutes, but it works a lot of quads and adductors. And you better do these in the most glute dominant fashion to work a little more glutes, a little bit less quads or whatever. So just hip extension alone, what are the hip extensors? It's not just the glute max. It's the glute max, the adductors, and the hamstrings. So anytime you do hip extension, it's those three in combination. How do you hone in on the glutes? You could say, well, why even do hip extension at all? Do abduction. Does that maximize lower glute growth if you lean forward? And if you start doing all your volume of leaning front or leaning horizontal plane hip abduction, would you develop overuse injuries? Probably. So you have to look at, all right, what about loaded posterior pelvic tilt? You just do a glute squeeze. That you feel mostly in the glutes, but that's such a short range of motion. Is that going to be effective at growing the glutes? We don't know. What about hip external rotation? That uses mostly glutes. Does it work the upper and lower gluteus maximus? Probably, but how do you create a program around that?
Tough, yeah.
So in theory, you do more hip external rotation, more posterior pelvic tilt, more leaning forward abduction in the transverse plane. We have no evidence on these for growing the glutes. We have EMG evidence showing high EMG activation, but they don't always work you through a full stretch. They don't move you through as much excursion as hip extension exercises do. And so it's complicated. It's tough to just target glutes without working the other muscles in the quads, the adductors, the hammies. And so this is where glute bridges become very enticing and hip thrusts and then kickbacks. But even kickbacks, if you do kneeling kickbacks or kickbacks from a high pulley position, you're going to involve your quads. It becomes kind of like a step up. If you do straight leg kickbacks, it's more like a back extension. It's like a hinge. So you do them swoopy. So there are ways to kind of make things more glute dominant, but you'd have to do more volume because you're not doing the biggest bang for your buck exercises. So can you do more volume? It would be really fun to do a controlled experiment looking at like the basics versus like a very grow your glutes without growing the legs dominant program, and look at, do you get the total glute growth doing a lot more volume for glutes because they're not as effective, but then you don't get the quad and adductor and hamstring growth. It's not easy to do. You're going to have to you're going to have a lot of bros telling you you're doing it wrong.
Yeah.
But it is complicated because the glutes are involved in the hip extension. Like I said, there are other hip extensors. Hip abduction, you got the glute medius, glute minimus, and TFL that do hip abduction as well. Hip external rotation, you got the deep six, hip external rotators. And so you kind of create even posterior pelvic tilt, the abs can do it. So when you're doing a glute squeeze, you got to make sure it's not the abs, it's coming from the glutes. So you're not going to be doing the most popular glute exercise, all the squats and lunges. You could throw those in and just do a couple sets and not do progressive overload, because you shouldn't fear getting gigantic quads from just doing the occasional squat or lunge. You just might not utilize progressive overload, and you got to do them in a glute dominant fashion, leaning forward, sitting back. But it is hard. It's not easy to do, and it requires biomechanical thought and consideration, which I don't see from a lot of people. Another criticism of the hip thrust is just because it looks sexual in nature. So what I started doing, because I heard this on podcasts by a couple people. So what I started doing is I started doing reaction posts to them, and I started saying, okay, so you're saying like this looks gay to do, but what is a Romanian deadlift? You're doing loaded bending over. So you're saying you'd rather do loaded bending over as a man than loaded thrusting. Personally, I think loaded thrusting is the more manly thing to do, but you're saying, so anyway, I put it back in their court and point that out. It's always a funny thing.
I got you.
I'm fine doing loaded bending over. I'm fine doing loaded opening and closing of your legs with abduction and adduction, and I'm fine doing loaded thrusting. It just needs to become more common and more familiar. But yeah, what it looks like shouldn't dictate. But I get it. I do get it. I
hope we have a little more maturity with exercise selection than that. When you first got here today and we were talking, I said, hey, I don't want to spend that much time talking about the glutes. And we did the whole thing, but that's okay. There's your knowledge is vast in many other areas of strength training, and you and I love strength training. We could do this for a very long time, very often, but one way or the other, we tackled a lot of information. I'll reiterate something I said earlier. Although we did focus on the glutes a lot here, I really do hope people can pull the lessons out to other forms of training, other training goals. You laid a lot of critical information about basic things like paying attention to what the client actually wants. It sounds funny, but that's really what you said. You notice clearly your clients, who just happen to be mostly women, were really wanting a certain thing. Now, maybe other women want different things. It doesn't matter. The point from a coaching perspective was you really actually listened to what the client wanted. In this case, many of them wanted bigger glutes. Could be selection bias there. It doesn't actually matter. It's specificity. It's getting better results because you're being more specific to the actual goals and listening to the client and not worrying about what you thought was a better exercise because that exercise worked better for you or for other clients, or a study said that, right? It's paying attention. So that was one thing I learned about really thinking about the client goals. The other one was, again, the examples were glutes and hip thrusts, but it doesn't matter. It is making sure if you're not getting progress that you are truly progressively overloading, that the effort is there and that you're not distracting it with either other exercises or other forms of exercise or other life things, making sure that there's enough stimulus in the way that you want to drive adaptation. And if you're not getting it there, then you need to think about other options, more variety, more ranges of motion, different range, less range of motion, like figuring out what one thing at a time is you need to change until your goals actually start or the thing you're trying to target starts making progress. And then you gave a ton of technical details. You covered a lot of biomechanics. You covered sagittal plane and frontal plane, and we covered a lot of anatomy. So hopefully people that have not had the exercise science background that you and I have will have learned a ton of things, again, whether they're coaches or themselves, so they can follow along more with research to get better application for their own individual process. And then really at the end there, we finished off with talking about how do you understand when new research comes up, implementing, changing, and adapting so that you're staying true to your core, your beliefs aren't changing, your principles aren't changing, but you're focused on outcomes, not methods, right? And methods come, methods go. What is the outcome you're really after? So a lot of value, hopefully, in all those areas. There's probably other summary points that I could think of, but those things kept coming back to me. Things that people say, but you gave so many direct examples of that from the scientific literature, from physiology, from anatomy, to many, many years of experience that ultimately that's invaluable information. I know that you provide a ton of value on your social media. You do a ton on your YouTube page, and potentially, I don't know if I could spill the beans, but maybe more YouTube stuff is coming in the near future. I've actually been to your seminars before. I've seen you speak a bunch of different times. So you are not shy about giving out information. I'd love to know where people can, learn more about you and all those things. But you have everything. You have training programs like Booty by Bret. My wife does. It's very, very affordable, reasonable, good program. So that all said, thank you for all that. As much as you are a business person and you've got money to make, you have given away so much stuff over the years at no or very reasonable price. You've changed a lot of people's lives. Not only have you grown some butts, but you've really educated a lot of people. So thank you for all that. And thank you for my wife, because she loves your program so much. That said, man, where can people pay attention to your stuff and learn it? And what is the best avenue?
Yeah, it's been Instagram for the last few years. Like, that's my main focus. Like you said, I'm going to start focusing on YouTube more. And then something we should all be doing is like getting emails, so newsletter. We should be better at that, because who knows, you can't predict these social media platforms.
Sure.
I don't send my newsletters out enough, but I never spam people. So that's, you get it, bretcontreras.com. But thank you for the kind words. Always happy to come back down the road and talk about other topics or updates if we have new science. Hoping to collaborate with you on some research down the road with your new facility. Seems amazing. And I've watched you rise up through your career. We've watched each other rise up.
You were way ahead, man.
Yeah, but we met through like Barbell Shrugged podcast and stuff, right? Like, yeah. And then seeing you become this rock star on Andrew Huberman's podcast, and seeing you grow this new research position, this new professor position. There's no one who deserves it more, because I like to think I'm in the same group. We don't just read the research, we work with actual clients, and it's different when you do that. You're looking at maximizing every athlete's performance on an individual level, and you can't just apply research to the masses. You have to do a lot of testing and figure out what's going to help them, what are their deficiencies, and what are the strategies that are going to help them improve the most. And I have so much respect for you as a practitioner, as a researcher, and as a fellow person in this industry who cares about steering us in the right direction. So thank you so much for having me on. It's an honor. And I feel very privileged to have scientific discussions with someone at your level. It's fun for me. So
I had a blast, man.
I hope the people enjoy it. Yeah.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for joining today's discussion with Dr. Bret Contreras. To learn more about Bret, follow along on his social media, see his products, courses, and other relevant items, please check the show notes for direct links. Thank you for joining for today's episode. My goal, as always, is to share exciting scientific insights that help you perform at your best. If the show resonates with you and you want to help ensure this information remains free and accessible to anyone in the world, there are a few ways that you can support. First, you can subscribe to the show on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple. And on Apple and Spotify, you can leave us up to a 5-star review. Subscribing and leaving a review really does help us a lot. Also, please check out our sponsors. The show would not exist without them and their exceptional products and services. Finally, you can share today's episode with a friend who you think would enjoy it. If you have any content questions or suggestions, please put those in the comments section on YouTube. I really do try my best to read them all and to see what you have to say. I use my Instagram and X profiles also exclusively for scientific communication, so those are great places to follow along for more learning. My handle is @DrAndyGalpin on both platforms. We also have an email newsletter that distills all of our episodes into the most actionable takeaways. We have newsletters on how to improve fitness in VO2 Max, how to build muscle and strength, and much more. To subscribe to the newsletter, just go to performpodcast.com and click newsletter. It's completely free, and we do not share your email with anybody. Thank you for listening. And never forget, in the famous words of Bill Bowerman, if you have a body, you are an athlete.